people want to get from A to B quickly, efficiently, preferably dry and safely. And as the economy gets tougher, cheaply. That's what we're trying to do with Mute.
What's your biggest screw up to date, and how did you come back from it?
I wish somebody had grabbed hold of me and shaken me back then and said, listen, this is not going to last forever. I went from owning $100,000, a hot blonde girlfriend and MGP, to 10 grand in debt. Give me a break. I'm Australian. I'm indestructible.
But it sounded like when you shifted to the entrepreneurial world, you were pissed off. Do you think that's a theme with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners?
I think it is. I had $2.2 million in my bank account. When you go to sleep and put your head on the pillow at night and you realise that mortgages have been paid because of your employment, people are living and renting and breathing because of you, how do you deal with it?
It's a significant challenge.
Some days I've gone, please, why is this happening? But God tends to strip you down before he builds you back up.
Welcome everyone to the Everyday Empires podcast. I'm sitting here with Patrick Davin, the founder of Mute International. Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Rohit. Thank you for having me, and look forward to sharing some interesting topics with you today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's going to be exciting. I think some of the stories you've told me pre-show were wild. So I'm really excited for you to elaborate on some of those today.
I think everybody has their own little stories, but some of them really are unbelievable sometimes, and you think people are not going to believe you. But anyway, most of what I'll tell today has not been embellished. It's actually true.
Well, firstly, just for the audience, if they don't know what Mute is,
yep,
let's run through what it is, how it works.
Okay.
Can someone get a Mute?
Yeah, look, Mute is a company where I've been involved in electric mobility for a long time, namely manufacturing of electric vehicles. And I had an epiphany a few years ago where the idea of selling electric vehicles to people was something that I thought was a bit passé because, I had a situation where I looked in a drawer one day and I had an iPhone 4 and an iPhone 5 and an iPhone 6, and I thought to myself, why am I buying all these when new technology is coming ahead? I bought an Apple computer that was £5,000. And I said to my secretary when I was overusing it 18 months later, I was moving house, I said, could you sell that? She said, well, we can get you £800 for it. And I said, hang on, it was, £5,000. She said, well, that's what happens with technology. So a combination of all of those things led me to believe that while we want people on green mobility and green transport, you don't want to be owning it. So that's what Mute's about. Mute's a concept. We call it the Netflix of electric two-wheeled mobility. So it's a international platform where you subscribe to us and we give you access to an electric two-wheeled moped. We're looking at other forms of transport, but in our main markets for two-wheeled mobility. And you pay a monthly subscription and that's it. If you don't like it, you hand it back. If you do like it, you keep it going. If you move to another country that we operate in, you continue to use it. And it's growing quite nicely here in London.
Yeah, fantastic. So you operate in several countries and have thousands of mopeds around the world. I mean,
yeah.
What are the specific numbers on that?
The company is a UK company. In a previous life, I raised some money on I dual listed a company in the UK a number of years ago in electric mobility manufacturing. It's called Vermoto. And so when I set up Mute, I had the idea of one day probably listing on AIM or raising capital here. So I made it a UK top company. But I was living in China at the time because I was overseeing the manufacturing of vehicles in my previous company. So China is a large market for electric mobility. So we set up operations in Shanghai and we've got to about 2,000 vehicles in Shanghai. And we operate in Australia because I'm parochially Australian to a small extent in Perth in Western Australia. We've got a few vehicles out there. We've got a small operation of a couple of hundred vehicles in Bali in Indonesia, close proximity to Perth. I'm very familiar with Bali. So I went to markets where I felt comfortable in going into. And we've recently, in the last 24 to 18 months, opened here in the UK, opened in Belgium. We've got 2 locations in Belgium, Antwerp and Brussels. and we've got offices but nothing on the road in both Spain and Greece at the moment where we're looking at expanding. The idea is to, not be limited to where we sort of are. Total fleet of vehicles is probably around 3,000 at the moment, but we have aspirations to sort of really expand when capital and the business allows.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, what a story. Because to get from zero, you founded it. Remind me, Patrick, what year was Mute founded?
It was founded 7 years ago, operationally. But mainly we only had bikes in China. And, China is very advanced electric. There's a huge population. There's 23 million people in Shanghai, so it wasn't difficult to get vehicles out there. The challenge for us was coming into effectively first world countries, although China arguably is a first world country, but it's coming into the Western markets where scooter transport is not really the first form of transport that people have when they're getting to and from work. The UK has 8.8 million people in here at any one time, a couple of million tourists. There's pretty good infrastructure here in terms of personal transport. You've got the tube and you've still got access to cars. It's a fairly wealthy country. So the challenge was coming here and making it work here. You've got a tyranny of average weather here as well. So, but global warming's now erasing that. So the challenge was coming here with no vehicles we came here 18 months ago, 24 months ago, and then creating a business from scratch. The supply chain had to be created and the customers had to be created. And we're only at 160 vehicles out in London at the moment, but it's not because the demand isn't there. It's because our capital hasn't allowed us to really expand. But it's been well accepted here, and it seems to be growing quite nicely.
Tyranny of average weather. I think that's a very British way of describing our weather. I think you've becoming sort of converted from Australian to British.
I don't mind the weather here. China had Shanghai, where I lived for 20 years, had extremes of weather. Like minus 10 to plus 40. You don't have those extremes here, but I've got used to the London weather. As long as it's not raining, I don't mind. I can handle the cold. And the roads are terrible. And there's, theft is an issue in the UK, and there is a lot of. It's a very litigious country. Insurance industry here is very, very difficult to deal with. Public liability is difficult to deal with here. So there's been a lot of challenges setting up the business here. But we're here to solve a problem for people. At the end of the day, prima facie value of Mute is people want to get from A to B quickly, efficiently, preferably dry and safely, and more and more as the economy gets tougher, cheaply. And that's what we're trying to do with Mute. And we've got an audience at the moment, and it's growing well. Our audience is, a lot of them are domestic residents who have lived here all of their lives, and then you've got a lot of people that are coming into the market that are just arriving in the country or are immigrated here and don't have the capacity to go out and buy these vehicles because, they don't have a credit record, they don't have a credit history. They might have only been in a short-term rental property or whatever. It's hard for them to get loans. So we provide the vehicles to those people as well. And I think there's a good market there for us. So solving a problem is like any business model. That's what you've got to do.
And speaking of problems, the last 7 years, you've had to battle with COVID. And for a mobility company, you must have had some extreme challenges at that time.
Yeah, COVID was horrible. We were only really had our exposure in Bali and China in COVID, and COVID hit China, believe it or not, later than the rest of the world. China was sort of, I don't know, for some reason they had their head in the sand and said, look, it's not really us. Everybody was blaming bats and this, that, and the other thing. And China just said, look at us, we're fine. But when it hit in China, it was incredibly stringent. I've been in 2 countries, both the UK and China, during the COVID period. And when COVID hit in China, the police put police tape across your door and you were not allowed outside your house. I was not allowed to walk my dog. So I remember having to teach the dog to a balut in the bathtub, which was not impressed, because for 5 years he was getting kicked on the backside if he ever went and peed in the house. And then all of a sudden I was encouraging him to pee in the house. So he was very confused. But we had 1,800 vehicles on the road at the time. And I had no choice but to say to people, well, if you can't use them, we can't charge you for them. So we did that, and we donated our vehicles to nurses and police departments and everything, which went down really well with local government. And after COVID ended, we ended up with a lot of ticks and a lot of boxes. And unbelievably, a large portion of not a large portion, but about 30% of our customers, realising that they wanted Mute to survive, continued to pay us over the COVID period. So we lost, a substantial amount of revenue. I got my staff to go and reduce salaries, which we caught up after COVID. We got some dispensation from the Chinese government in terms of rental of our premises and all that sort of thing. But it was something like any business, as you would well know. We didn't need the COVID impact. But I think if you handled COVID and you came through it, I think it was a good litmus test to whether your business is going to survive. And I think a lot of people that had businesses that were toing and froing used COVID as an excuse to throw in the towel. There was if you go bankrupt in your own right now, for example, there's a black cloud pointed at you, and you've got a history of that. But in the days of COVID, you could just go bankrupt whenever you like and say, blame it on COVID. Nobody would bat an eyelid. It was a very, very easy escape from debt and other things, because banks and everybody understood where you were. I decided to take the hard path, which was keep the company alive, keep the business going, and prove to people that we were more than just a COVID business, and then a business that was one-dimensional, and that's sort of played us in good stead to come through the other end. So here we are now, But it still takes years for that. I think in revenues, we probably lost $500,000. We're a small company with global revenues of, just over £1 million, and we lost probably $500,000 during that COVID period. So in a start-off period when you're losing $500,000, it was really, really tough.
Well, we'll talk a bit more about Mute and where it is today. We've got some exciting next steps, and 2025 is certainly looking like a big year for me. Probably one to etch in a milestone timeline as in Mute's story. But sort of one of the first questions we ask all of our guests, just to kind of give the audience a flavour of who you are. What's your biggest screw up to date, and how did you come back from it?
That's a good question. I think my biggest screw up to date would be in my mid-30s. I don't come from a money background. I work for everything that I've got. I wouldn't say success reasonably early. I worked extremely hard, and I have done all of my life. But in my early 30s, I had reasonable amount of success in that I had access to funds, and I had a program in place where most of my investments and most of the businesses I was involved with were growing exponentially. And in my mind, I was thinking that it would continue. I got heavily into real estate because there was a real estate boom in Australia where I was living at the time. And it was just one thing after another. I would buy a warehouse, for example, for $300,000 or $400,000, and within 6 months it was worth $500,000 or $600,000. And I was buying one, selling it, buying another 2 apartments. At one stage, I think I had 11 apartments in Perth. I went and bought, as it got more successful, I used money from my businesses to continue to invest in real estate. And naively, I thought this is just going to continue. I remember once, I'd already bought a house for 2.7 million Australian dollars, which I was living in at the time, and the house across the road was going for auction, and it was the auction price was estimated to go between $8 to $11 million at the time, and I rang my bank manager from the balcony of my house and said, look, the house across the road is coming up for auction. If I walk down to the house now and bid in the auction and I put my house up for mortgage, you can mortgage against my house, how? And he said, Patrick, go down there and you can bid. I've just looked at your account. You can bid up to $11 million. I went across the road and I did. I bidded to $10 million and I pulled out at $10 million. And that house sold for $11 million. But that's how stupid and naive I was. I was thinking that buy that for 10 million, flick it in 2 years for 20 million, all good. But there was a little thing in the US happening at that time called Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac, which everybody thought was just a US-based thing, but it wasn't. It was a global-based, big chill or big slowdown in the industry, and real estate just absolutely crapped itself. You can beat that out. And
you're allowed to swear on the podcast.
No worries.
Not a problem.
So consequently, I was left holding the baby with a whole lot of things, and I was well in over my debt levels. And I'd thought, well, I'll pay my taxes later and all that sort of thing. I got a huge tax bill from the Australian tax office, which I had to pay. I had to sell any toys I had, and I had to wind down my real estate. And as I was winding it down, it just fell off the edge of a cliff. So that is my biggest mistake. But it left me with enough money to survive and develop Mute and to do other things. And also it changed my perspective entirely on, I wish somebody had grabbed hold of me and shaken me back then, because as a 35 or a 38-year-old, I could fly around the world first class. I could do whatever I wanted. And I wish somebody had grabbed me and said, listen, this is not going to last forever. You do believe that it's just going to keep on going. Even if one country slows down, you jump to another country and you do this, you do that. And so basically I got slammed and lost most of what I had. And it takes a long time to build back to, I'm still nowhere near back to those levels, and it takes a long time to build back. But I'm also building back in an entirely different way now. I don't aspire to a flash car. I don't aspire to turning left when I get onto an aircraft. I'm happy to fly economy. I'm a totally different person these days. And I think you have to have the chips knocked off your shoulders before you get to that level. And so, that's my single biggest mistake to date. There are heaps of minor ones, but that was the big one.
If you don't mind me saying, Patrick, you're sort of in and around the 60-year-old mark. I wasn't
going
to
I'm 60. I'm 61 this year. I still, ask any 60-year-old entrepreneur, I'm a born and bred entrepreneur. You just can't shut your brain off. I'm looking at different ways to do everything and better ways to do everything every single day. It's like a nightmare that you have. I saw Elon Musk, not that I'm comparing myself to him the other day, but he was talking in a podcast like I am now and said a lot of people envy him and want to be him, but he said they haven't spent a day in my life. He said, with my brain, there's a fair bit going on up there and it's not easy. I don't have Elon Musk's brain or intellect, but I can understand what he's saying about being an entrepreneur. And at 60, I don't think the clock's ticking, but there are so many things you want to do and there's still so much you want to achieve. And it's not about money to me anymore. It's about actually leaving a mark, a business here that actually is doing something. And all of the businesses that I've had a mining business, which I sold to a bigger mining company, which is still operating. I started a scooter manufacturing business, which I listed on the stock exchange, which is still operating. And then I had a Japanese restaurant in Perth, which I did as a side business, which I started 30 years ago and is still operating. None of the businesses that I've ever created have hit the wall, been sold out, diminished in value, or anything like that. They've all kept there. And Mute is now, all of the other businesses have brought me to the point where it's helped me create Mute. And now Mute is the one that I sort of bring it home with, And the aspirational things of Mute are not to buy a house overlooking the river with a great view or to go to a Porsche dealership and buy a new Porsche. It's about creating a wealth base that we can share and that, it sounds very corny, but it is actually true. Building a business that works, that solves problems for people, that at the same time makes money. And when it makes that money, we then come to people like you and say, Rohit, we've got money to invest and money to deploy, and you then help us in getting the best out of that money. And when I say the best, not just the best return on investment, but the best that can actually make the world a better place. That's the game plan.
Yeah. And when you find someone who has a similar mindset to yourself, and we talked about this actually just before, and for many times that investing in good businesses with good people behind them is actually a difficult thing to do. But there are a plethora of them. And if you look at sort of standard investment metrics and what people look at and what funds look at, often they miss the obvious points. And the obvious points are, well, who are the people behind it? What have they done to date? What kind of people are they? And they miss it because they're very difficult things to put your name next to.
Yep.
And very difficult things to quantify.
Yep.
You can't put it on a spreadsheet. How good is this person? Do you believe him? Are they honest? Are they trustworthy? Do they have integrity? How have they demonstrated that? But often, as you and I both know, those are actually the differentiating factors of what it means to be a good business owner and good entrepreneur.
Well, yeah, I think you and I had a brief discussion the other day. We're having a Zoom call on something, and we were talking about investment in Mute and other things, and you said at the time that you really invest in the people. Now, I think you've got to have a decent business model, and you can't just have a person who's pure at heart that's an idiot. But I think at the end of the day, if you invest in people that are honest and hardworking, that's a pretty good start, and we try to be that. We try and play a straight bet. You can't play a straight bet all the time in business, as you would know. Show me one forward cash flow in history that has ever exceeded itself. You're always going to put the best light. You're always going to say that you've got this revenue and you've got these costs, but it's always going to be different. Doesn't matter what you do. That's a form of making your business look better than it is, and sometimes it's not particularly truthful, but you try and do the best you can. And at the end of the day, people get found out that keep bullshitting, and people get found out that don't work hard. It's one of the things that saddens me at the moment is that I'm employing people here, and I sit down with people in interviews and stuff, and the questions that they ask me are always about, can I work from home? What are my hours? Even this week, I've employed somebody in marketing, and they're a 24-year-old person here that's used to working from home. And I said, well, home is a great place to have a meal and have a sleep. But if you're marketing, I would expect that, and it's a 20-hour-a-week job, that those 20 hours a week be much better placed in contacting face-to-face the contacts that you've made. And it's interesting to see how people are there's a lot of people out there at the moment who just are getting used to earning money sitting at home, and they're watching social media, and they're watching these ridiculous people on social media that embellish how much they're earning. And if I see another person with a Lamborghini on social media, I think I'll vomit. It's like they're just there is a mindset out there at the moment of just it's easy to do everything, and it's not. You've got to make the hard telephone calls, you've got to make the hard yards, you have to work, you have to get up, you have to get dressed. You can't just waddle around your house in your pajamas and snacking all day and doing the odd email and thinking you're getting fair value. I love going back to Elon Musk again, pardon me, that, Tesla has recently said to people, you now no longer work from home. You've got to come in. Because, companies build a sense of community. We're a very, very small company, but I want to build a sense of community in that company. I want to build a sense of comradeship. I want to build a sense of if one's down, the others lift you up, et cetera, et cetera. I want our employees to feel like they're never alone, and that isolationist thing that's going on at the moment with the internet and that everybody can work from home and everything, I think is just crazy. So, yeah, we live in interesting times.
That's really, I'm really interested that you said that, because we just released a special episode with Yash Agarwal, who was former investment banker, now he's turned entrepreneur, and he's on the younger side. He's 20, 24, 25.
Wow.
And the discussion we had was around sort of Gen Z and sort of whether they are the laziest generation. He had quite a strong rebuttal. And fair play to him, given his career. You certainly couldn't call him lazy,
No.
for sure. But one discussion we were having was around sort of how do you motivate sort of younger people?
Yep.
Because the rebuttal I get back, and actually from some of our content, was around, well, what are we working for? Because we can't really buy anything, because we can't hope to own a home, because prices are crazy. Salaries aren't relative and proportional to be able to achieve what we want to achieve. So we're not motivated to do more than just the 9 to 5, work from home, make it convenient for us. We'll take our wage, and instead of saving up like maybe other generations did, we're going to spend it on experiences, because that's all that we hope to actually enjoy. Now the rebuttal to that is, well, you're taking a snapshot of your life right now. In a few years' time, as you hopefully will elaborate, I can certainly elaborate on my own career. But you have to hone a craft. You have to build a skill set, get to a certain level. Once you've got that salary, then you can start to enjoy life a little bit more and have more flexibility. And then when you're in your sort of more higher earning prime years, that's when you have the ability to do so. And if you're lucky enough to go through that process quickly, then you can do those things earlier. But there's that delayed gratification point. And the rebuttal to that is, well, it then becomes a question of scale. I'm young, I want to travel, I'm fit, I don't have any health issues. Why am I doing all this in my 70s and 80s when I retire? Why don't I just do it now when I can actually fully enjoy it?
Oh, look, I think there are, and I mean, I didn't want to come across like a generalization that everybody's lazy. That's not true.
Of course.
But I think in a world where you've got, I mean, in my company, you can't, my generation, baby boomers, I was born in 1964, the last year of the baby boomers. Our parents' generation were very hardworking, entrepreneurial and hardworking, or worked for the same companies. My father worked in security for a bank in Australia. He was ex-military, so he got a job there. My mother was an artist. But they really worked hard. They did what they could. I mean, it's my mother's art paid for me to go through primary school and all that sort of thing. And I just don't see in this generation and it's maybe because of what's happening in this generation. There's 8.8 billion people in the world. There's 1.4 Chinese. When our parents were growing up, China was considered a third world country. There's 1.45 million Indians. Same story there. And all of a sudden you've got the competitiveness of, there's 3 billion people, nearly half the world's population, that are coming for us and coming for the people that are here. And due to the internet and due to technology, everybody can see what everybody's earning, and everybody can see, there's this microcosm of people that are super wealthy. There's a huge differentiation between wealthy people and poor people. And it's in your face every day. In 1965 and 1975 or whatever, you didn't have the internet. You couldn't Google who's getting paid what. Now every day you've got comparatives for yourself. So I'm forced with the decisions that I have to speak to my staff. Luckily, I've got a small number of staff, and I don't even call them staff. We're team members. Nobody works for me. They work with me. And I constantly ask them what's important to them, or I try to. And it might be that they're trying to get a deposit for a house or a deposit for a car, or, it's things have left the field. And I've actually learned this a bit from you, because never anticipate that you know everything about everybody. It's not true, and my job at the moment is to try and incentivize these people to have a happy job life and to have aspirational things. I'm lucky that I do have the capacity, because I have aspirational growth for my business, so I can give equity to my team members that they might actually make some decent money out of it at the end of the day. But it must be hard for people that don't have that. And as an entrepreneur, it gnaws away at me. I'm always looking for the next thing, I always want to go to the next thing, not driven by money, driven by making the systems better, and it's very, very frustrating for me on a daily basis that I know there's a group of guys sitting behind and girls sitting behind their computers in China and India who are, DeepSeek, for example, that we've seen in the last few weeks, that are generating business and generating things, but I'm constantly trying to find something to encourage my people. And when I'm employing new people, and it's just a microcosm of what I'm seeing. They're aspiring to far greater than what they're capable of at 24 and 25. They have zero experience. They've sat in front of a computer. They still think a marketing job can be done from a chair. I mean, who does a marketing job from a chair? Call me old-fashioned, and I am old-fashioned. I still use email. And email, honestly, my staff laugh at me when I send them an email. Now they say it's all WhatsApp. We just summarize everything in WhatsApp chat groups or WeChat in China or whatever it is. So they're the challenges that I've got as a 60-year-old in business to try and encourage my staff to move forward, and also to sit down and employ new staff and try and understand what they want at their level. It's incredibly difficult.
No, I think it's a question we're going to keep having for a long time. It's just I want to be able to help younger people and sort of make the equation work for them. And admittedly, when I went into the workplace, my parents just taught me, work really hard.
Yeah.
Then you'll get, in my case, a qualification.
Yeah.
Then you go to the next level and so on and so forth. And then it's fine to, go to different companies and build your career. You don't have to stay with the one firm for so many decades.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you want to be building towards something. And a job is a safe place to do that. And if you work in the upper echelons of what you do, you still earn great money, which the equation worked at the time when I was entering the workforce of 2014, 2015. Yeah. But I can see the perspective of the younger guys when they're sort of going, we can probably earn good money, but the house prices are insane. We'd have to live 50, 60 miles away for working in central London to have a decent standard of living. I'm not willing to accept the standards of living in central London for what I can afford.
Yep.
Which is a fair point. So I think it will be an equation that we have to balance together to get that right. But it's a challenge.
You've got Apex. You built that in the last few years from 1 employee to 24 employees. When you're sitting down and dealing with your guys, and they're in various ages and stages of their career, what are you offering them aspirationally? How do you deal with that? Do you take the responsibility of that on, or are you just saying to them, do you compartmentalize that and say, look, I'm giving you a salary, you shouldn't want more? Or do you give them some sort of hope of aspiration? Do you internal progress, extra salaries, extra responsibilities, equity buyouts? How do you keep your guys engaged?
So it's about, there's several things, but the bigger thing is that you're not just coming here to do a job. You're coming here to change people's lives, because that's what we do in the accounting world and the professional services world. So for Apex, it's not just about doing a tax return, because that tax return can then be used as a form of documentation for someone's mortgage, which could be their home, their first time they're buying a house. And so if we get our job right, people can buy their own homes.
Yep.
Now, fine, I'm elevating a simple task into sort of changing people's lives, but what I'm hoping to encourage, our team members is that they come into the office and they know that they're making a difference and that they're helping people.
Do you let your employees work from home, or do you have free Fridays, or do you?
There's no formulaic way, but we do offer flexible working on 2 fronts. One is at the Apex level, the accountancy firm. We always advise the first 6 months to be in the office 5 days a week, because then you build your connections with the team, you build a rapport with everyone. And ultimately there are client meetings, and if you need to meet the client, they're not going to come to your house, or they shouldn't be. So there's a level of sort of building up that. Well, clients have dropped off paperwork at people's houses before. I always get nervous about it, but everyone's fine.
I've met your wife. They're pretty brave if they come to your house.
Well, exactly. I'm brave sometimes, but it's one of those things where we encourage people to be part of a team, is what you were sort
Yeah.
of saying before. But the team members that have said, look, I want like a Thursday to be at home. I go, why a Thursday? And they just go, well, that day, very often I might have to do the school run because my partner can't do it, or I just want to have a day at home where no one's bothering me with questions. I need to just do my work. So there's a purpose behind the sort of working from home.
Yeah.
The business plan, which we bought the business from, so sort of we're inheriting a culture to a large extent, and the culture was a beautiful one that was set up by the founders. And initially, it was about getting mothers who had been out of work for a while to come back into work. And a lot of these mothers were super qualified. I mean, extremely capable and competent.
It's a great idea.
They just focused on sacrificing for the family, which isn't often an equation that these lovely people had to sort of to make that sacrifice. But you know, the kids are a bit older and they've got a bit more time and they can commit to working some level of.
And they've got huge experience to share, you know.
I mean, they're extremely well qualified. And so we were naturally doing that at Apex. I mean, there's some, I'm sure Amy wouldn't mind me saying, but Amy's one of our superstars at Apex. And she kind of said, look, I'd love to work here. She came from a bit of work experience. She did an amazing job. And we said, right, we're going to offer you a job because you're amazing. And she said, oh, but I need to leave every day at 2:45 to pick up her lovely daughter. And I said, okay, and that's it? She was like, yeah, that's it. I'm happy with everything else. So I said, if we're a bit more flexible our side, all we have to do is leave at 2:45 to pick up your lovely daughter. And if we need you to, you can jump on the laptop a bit later or, you know, make it up elsewhere. She's like, yeah, absolutely, no problem at all. And so there's a natural sort of alignment with culture there.
Yep.
But that's another way that we engage our team, is that, you know, people do want to work. They want to have a sense of fulfillment. They want to be productive. They want to, it's not about the salary and sort of defining their worth. That's obviously an important part, but it's about doing something that's fulfilling. And so a lot of the people at Business Can, the way we engage them is by giving them, you know, that opportunity to be flexible and work on your own terms, but also with interesting clients.
Yep.
Now, I do get that the equation a lot of the time is, look, I'm here to provide my services, my labor. You're here to pay me a salary and kind of make my environment pretty, you know, reasonable to work in, which I get. But I think there's a transactional nature to that kind of mindset. What I'm looking for in a team member is someone that's willing to appreciate the vision that we've got, because we're not. Yours, obviously, our businesses are very different, but ultimately, we have a purpose behind exactly what we're doing. It's not about making money simply. The money is there to sustain the business, but it's also there to reinvest back into it to then grow it to the next level. And in your case, obviously, you know, work your magic with me.
What's your churn like in terms of your employees? You know, do you have I mean, we look at churn in terms of customers, but in terms of employees, what sort of churn rate do you have? Do you have a lot of people coming and going in the company?
Very few people. I mean, there's
that's a really good litmus test of a company, to be honest. If they stay, they like the founders, they're getting fairly treated, etc., etc., etc. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, and I think a good bit of feedback we get. Well, we look at the churn rate on customers as well, because naturally for professional service firms and accountancy firms, you're worried about. It's relatively simple to change accountant. I wouldn't say if you're a more complex business, it is more difficult. But if you simply need to get your tax return done every year, you can pretty much change every year if you wish to. So we have to constantly prove to our client base that we're here. And our churn rate, I think, in the last 3 years, on our 4 years since I've been running the firm, has been less than 0.5%.
Right.
Which I've been really proud of. I can probably tell you the clients that have left out of our sort of 1,200 clients.
But also, more importantly, your employees, they're staying. Those 24 people, you're not losing them every few months.
Yeah, people, exactly. And now we're at a position where actually the team has well bedded in. There's no one that has, well, as far as I know, is thinking of leaving or
we're the same in Mute. You know, from the 7 or 8 years ago that we started, you know, the 90% of the people that started with Mute are still with Mute. You know, people have changed country circumstances, marriage circumstances, children. But other than that, we've had nobody that's turned around and said, we don't like your philosophy or the way you treat us and we're out of here.
Exactly.
Which I think is really important. But I question one businessman to another. I mean, your employees are, as I call them, team members. But you're still the head of the company and responsible for the success of the company. How do you sleep at night when, like I know that one of our guys in London the other day, I had to approve something for a car loan for them, and it was a substantial car loan. It's not my job to tell them, trust me, my experience is don't go and buy an expensive car, which I'd love to do. I warn them, of course, but when you go to sleep and put your head on the pillow at night and you realise that mortgages have been paid because of your employment and cars have been bought because of your employment and houses have been bought and, people are living and renting and breathing because of you, a person like you is much better value working, on the business and in the business. In doing that, you're securing the future of the business, but it's a very, very, from an emerging business, it's a very, very tricky stage to actually get to that level. You're always got to sort of have one foot in the business. I find it when you hand the bank account details over to somebody, I did that recently with Mute where, I trusted people that they were running the bank accounts, and it's a very, very big step. We've got locations in every country, and I can tell you within £100 what's in every bank account from every location around the world at any given time. But given the bank account and giving up power in the business is really, really difficult to do. You don't want to micromanage the people. You want to give them responsibility. You want to trust them. You want them to feel that they're really important. It's not easy. It's a juggling every day. Can I top you up at all, mate? I mean, I'm pouring myself, but
don't you worry. I'll definitely.
I feel like
well,
second hour I'll just be a blubbering mess on the end of the. Just get me a straw and a.
But I think it's
straw and an ice crusher, and just keep asking me questions.
I think what a lot of the things we're talking about and we're pointing to is that when people talk about growth mindset and sort of having the ability to be able to take that next step within your business, what we're talking about are the actions from having that mindset. Because if you were always that kind of person saying, look, I need to keep control, I can't delegate certain number of tasks, then you're never going to grow. Because if you're monitoring the bank account, whilst you might feel like it's an important thing to do, ultimately someone else can do that.
Yes.
And instead of you spending a couple of hours a week on looking at your finances or looking at the bank account or bank accounts, you get a 5-minute report from your accountant or from internal person. So, but to get to that stage, you have to have the ability to trust people, to delegate well, to give clear instruction at all times, to be able to see if there's a mistake, then sort of work with that. But that takes time. That takes a lot of time. And
technology is improving things though remarkably, and talking of bank accounts, we've got two banks, one with Virgin Bank and one with Apex. With not Apex, what are they called? Oh, one of the other ones. And the amount the amount of change from a traditional high-end street bank, and we've seen the issues with Barclays this week, to the other bank accounts that we've got. The technology is just breathtaking. Like you're scanning your receipts, putting them on, it's coming back, it's advising me what my bookkeeping standard is looking at, like with regards to what I'm giving to my accountant, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of technology things that are happening in business that are breathtaking in terms of AI and everything else that's occurring. What's your take, one businessman to another, on the emergence of AI and how it'll affect your business and going forward? And are you intimidated by it? Are you happy about it? Do you see it saving you work, creating problems? I had a legal issue the other day that would normally require a lawyer to be involved, and I went into AI and gave the synopsis entirely to, as I would do, sitting down with the lawyer, who would have asked me for £1,500 deposit in the bank account, plus there would have been another £1,000 at the end of it. And the AI gave me the answer, and I had a lawyer who's a friend of mine, and I said, look, what do you think of this? Could you review this free of charge for me? And he came back and said, this is better than I could have ever come back with, and I would have charged you, £3,000 to £4,000 to do that. Does accounting and what you're doing in your business, how does it impact on you?
In a significant way. So there's two or three things. One is on the more laborious side, or process-driven side, I should say, of bookkeeping. That will fundamentally change. It already pretty much is there. Where you've got great accounting systems like Xero that will pull in the transactions from your bank statement, and will use machine learning and a whole host of other tools to realize what transactions. Clunk. It's amazing. And all you really need to do as a human is kind of click through and just sense check.
Yep.
That sense check is important because it's not perfect, but AI will make that perfect. So from a bookkeeping perspective, accountants across the world will become virtually redundant. I think AI will take that over completely. So what does that mean for the accountant? I think it means a few things. One is that we'll shift from just filing a form or doing bookkeeping into providing advice, because the level of comfort our clients get, whilst AI can get you a lot of the way there, and just with your story that you just told, you still went to a good friend who was a lawyer to have a sense.
Oh, yeah, I was totally intimidated by it,
So it's one of those things where I think advice from an accountant will always be that verifier, that comfort blanket, that acknowledgement that this is fine, what AI is saying. That could change over time, but I think that level of trust that you have with a human to look them in the eye and say, I've done this kind of research, is that correct? What are the nuances?
Yeah.
And I get a lot of calls from clients that go, I've researched this and I think this is the answer. No, that's completely wrong, because you've looked at that part and that part doesn't apply to you. So
it's a big problem in medical diagnosis.
Yeah, I was going to say, what's it? WebMD, I think, is caused more deaths than it's saved. But it's that's one thing that I think accountants need to be conscious of, that bookkeepers or bookkeeping activities are going to fall away completely, especially in the next 5-10 years. So we need to become better advisors. We need to become better at advising our clients on broad commercial matters, not just accounting matters, and be someone that they can trust. And if they've got a business idea or they've got a big decision to make, especially in the small and medium-sized business world, the accountant is one of the very few people they can probably call and have a considered discussion with, an informed discussion. Coming at it from
you become more of a strategist than just munching numbers,
right? Which is where I think, where I think Apex is very much heading towards. We do a lot of procedural stuff in drafting accounts, but because there's a statutory element and a legal element, we advise a lot our clients in terms of how can they reduce their tax bills, how can they make better use of the funds they have in their firms. If they want to buy something expensive like an electric vehicle, what's the tax implications of it, and how do we actually implement it? So there's that side. On the consultancy side, which is where Business Plan operates, we're already strategists. That's where we make our money. So where we'll push through is more using AI as a tool to enhance our advice and make it even better, make it even sharper. And if we're producing something, we'll produce that deliverable quicker, be it a report or designing a website or implementing an IT system.
Do you worry about this credit score thing that is now going on, where it's becoming so much more about a credit score? I look at my credit cards and everything now. I've got a Monzo account and everything, and it tells me my credit score, and it tells me if I've overdrawn or been late on a payment for a credit card, do you worry that the systems that are in place now could be separating the population into people with a decent credit score and people with non-decent credit score, and it changes the way people live? People won't be let into certain restaurants if, for example, the facial recognition as they walk in there says that they can't afford to be in that restaurant, or they can't board an aircraft because of facial recognition. Do those sort of things worry you at all, or do you see it as just part
for
of
me,
progress?
no. I think it's if you follow Rohit the Accountant, we have plenty of content around improving your credit score.
Oh, there you go.
But I think ultimately a business will like for mine, if I charge a fee, I expect it to be paid.
Yeah.
And because we can see the numbers,
Yeah.
it's a bit easier for us.
Yeah.
For like a restaurant, for example, a high-end Michelin star restaurant.
Yep.
Ultimately, if the person can, there's a lot of optics that I think are taken into account when you allow someone into the restaurant. But ultimately, there is an assumption or a trust level there that they're coming in, they've made a reservation, booked in, they should be able to afford, a couple £100 a head, or whatever expensive restaurant will be. I think in the future, to prevent someone from entering into a restaurant or an establishment because your credit score's low, I think it'd be a very significant step. Ultimately, if you have the means to pay, then you should be allowed in. I don't think the restaurant will deny that. I think my concern around credit scores will be around the procedural elements of allowing someone to get some kind of loan to then buy an asset like a home, for example. I think the mortgage market, particularly in the UK, is very much a computer says no kind of reference. Which if you know Catherine Tate, you know where that computer says no reference comes from. But it's one of those things where my concern is that people will start to focus on jumping through tick boxes and hoops rather than on what they're actually supposed to be doing, which is to get a better credit score, you need to be better financially situated. So focus on the building up your finances, getting a better salary, or increasing your income, making sure you manage your debt properly. And they're just going to go, well, I know what these processes are, and I know how the credit score is rating me. I'll just manipulate my circumstances to get a better score.
Yeah. I can already see how that could happen. I mean, how do you see it going? I mean, for me, I look at it like I think the cash economy is going to be drummed out, because it's just not going to and it'll always be there as sort of an underworld thing. But I think, cryptocurrencies are now coming into play. People, AI will then automate everybody's tax returns and that sort of thing, so they'll know exactly what's going to happen. That's already occurring. What do you think of how this is going to emerge with regards to cryptocurrencies? What's your general feel about cryptocurrencies? I've never asked you. I'd be really interested to see what you think.
Well, I generally have two questions on it. One, I get asked, is it a good investment class? And secondly, can I use it for something?
Difficult questions, right?
Yeah, well, who do you talk to about it, right? Yeah. You can Google it or you can chat GPT it, but in terms of an opinion, your financial advisor, your wealth manager, or your accountant are the two people you probably ask. As an investment class, probably a good wealth manager would say it's definitely something to be exposed to, but it's one of the most riskiest investments you could possibly make. So put it as a small percentage of your portfolio, have some fun with it, but don't probably exceed more than 5% of what your net worth is, or your
you mean I shouldn't buy a Trump coin?
Yeah. Well, you should buy Trump coin, but if you've got £100, spend £5 on it. Don't put £100 into Trump coin. Hopefully, it goes to 200. Even Donald Trump.
Let me get onto my broker. Get me out of the Trump coin.
You need to make a call. Should we pause? At the end of the day, you do what you can to
I've restrained myself from buying 3D Mickey Mouses and stuff at the moment.
Please and thank you. Please and thank you, Patrick. So, I think it's a fascinating world. I think that over time, as technology gets better, and I think as the meta world and the sort of virtual reality world starts to build out, I think cryptocurrency will be used as a form of currency within that world. This is 20, 30 year stuff, though. I think for now, I think people should understand it,
Yeah.
especially if you're below the age of 50.
Yeah.
I think people should assume it's going to be part of their daily lives, and don't fight it. Learn
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
and don't get. I mean, it's what you'd say about anything.
Yeah.
Don't get too greedy with the investment class. If something's gone up 20%, doesn't mean you
Yeah.
then put more in to get another 20%.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You analyze the market as you would with anything else, and that's it.
I think for me, I mean, I'm a lot older than you, obviously. For me, the biggest challenge is trying to keep up with everything, you know. And I do courses all the time. I've just finished some units of a Wharton University MBA to learn about, you know, what's happening in regards to 6-week course on what's happening with how IPOs are changing and what strategies people are using to list companies. And there's so much changing in a daily basis at the moment that a person like myself, I mean, I really try to keep up. You know, I keep my ear close to the ground, and I try to understand what's going on. You know, I draw the line at investing in Trump coins and that sort of thing. But for me, one of the biggest challenges at the moment is trying to keep up with the technology that's going on in the background. It's really, you know, it's just unbelievable. As I said, I've been using ChatGPT for things very rarely, but, you know, I signed up, I paid £25 a month or whatever for ChatGPT. And in the background, if I have a tricky email I've got to send, I just give it the guts and then I will change. I'll never send out something and cut and paste ChatGPT. I'll always use it as a reference point, not as a direct communication. But the biggest challenge that I'm finding at the moment is, you know, the technology that is involved in new business is trying to keep up with it. That's where, you know, having an accountant like you is a relief to us, because that's your job to keep up with that. You know, that's one aspect of the business that you can go, I'll just talk to the experts, you know, because you can't keep up every aspect of it. One of the things that's beneficial to Mute is that we actually have a tangible product, you know, and in this day and age, it's a horrible investment thing because people don't want to invest in tangibility. You know, we have a fixed asset that is used to get people from A to B, but it has its upside in that you actually have a tangible asset. That's a moat to competition for a lot of people because they don't want to invest in the tangible asset, and we have the supply chain locked down. But I take some comfort in what's happening because unless they come up with, I don't know, that thing that Harry Potter flies around in, a widget, or what is it, a squidgy? What's the like a broom?
The brooms they fly on.
Unless
the Nimbus 2000.
Yeah, unless they come up with that, you're going to have to use something tangible. So for our business, I'm on the cusp of old-fashioned businesses in that people want to get from A to B, and we give them an asset to do it, and our business has evolved around the utilisation of that asset, the return on investment of that asset. But there's a lot of businesses out there at the moment. I mean, DeepSeek, for example, has been an example to everybody. You know, somebody at DeepSeek sat there and was clever enough to say to ChatGPT, design a business that's in competition to you, give it a name, and tell us how to do it, and give us the keys to the kingdom. We've got some chips already, assuming that we've got the chips. And ChatGPT probably cannibalized itself by giving them enough information to then go and do it. The reason they've made it, in my opinion, open source is because they know that the next person can come along and do that as well. And so ChatGPT costs $500 billion to produce. DeepSeek costs $6 million to produce. And if it's open source, you should technically be able to go into DeepSeek and say, give us another version of this that is smarter than you, and do it for 1 month subscription of DeepSeek, which is free, by the way.
Yeah.
So it sort of goes like this. I mean, it doesn't keep me up at night, but because I'm not smart enough, but it would keep people like Elon Musk and the founder of ChatGPT up at night. That's for sure.
Well, I think it's one of those, if you don't mind me saying, I think it keeps people up at night because of the political elements behind it. That DeepSeek is Chinese backed, and OpenAI is Western backed or US backed, and when you overlay the politics of it, that's when the nervousness comes.
Yep.
But if you're looking at it from a technological perspective, all you're looking at is a competition.
Yeah.
ChatGPT came along. It's a fantastic product.
Mm.
Millions and millions of people use it all over the world. Fair enough.
Yeah.
It's not unfathomable to think that another product will come along that's better than ChatGPT, probably built quicker.
Yeah.
It's just the fact that it's Chinese backed. Everyone's going, oh, what about data sharing and privacy and all the rest of it? But there will probably be another one that comes along that's better than DeepSeek.
Exactly.
Maybe made in Europe.
Exactly.
And it costs £3 million or 3 million euros.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So for me, I take a step back sometimes because you're sort of proud of who we are as a people, that we are getting to a stage where this thing called AI is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
And will help us to do more and be more and be more productive.
I saw a thing this morning, actually on TV, that the breast cancer is a huge issue in the UK, and people have got to go through the NHS and book a breast cancer test, which is very, very hard to do, and there's a long wait list and everything. And somebody's now come up through AI that through your phone you can download an app and scan your own breasts and check yourself for.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's amazing.
You'd think, wow, it's not. They're saying it'll just give you an initial response to whether you've got breast cancer or not. Now, it'll probably be a lot of false alerts in terms of people that'll have a benign thing will contact NHS. But the fact that you might be able to get onto breast cancer early through AI, and for that matter, it could probably be the same for testicular cancer or any other cancers. It's going to be crazy, what it can actually do. So I don't think I think we just tipped the top of the iceberg. While we're on the subject of it, our vehicles are tracked with a GPS tracker, and we do that. The whole concept of that was not that we want to track where people are. We want to prevent theft, right? So, and we only use it when it's theft. If somebody says, I've forgot my scooter's not there, we use it for two things. On Sunday mornings after a big night at the football, we get 10 or 12 of our customers in London who forget where they parked their scooter because they were drunk. And we love that because we go, where were you? They go, it's been stolen. We go, which pub were you at? We go, was that the Bear and the Hound? And we go, boom, and we go left, go right, go left. Oh, thank you, sorry. I forgot. But we genuinely use it for theft, and we can report to the police immediately when a bike is stolen, and the police can cauterise it, and consequently our theft is minimalised. And we brought the theft of scooters down statistically in London. I met with the police the other day and they said, because of you guys, the theft statistics are actually coming down because
wow.
You've now got a decent sized fleet, and as a percentage of what's been stolen, you're actually having an impact. So that's important to us. But the other day I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, we've got GPSs in our bikes that are going to a satellite and knowing where they all are. One was stolen recently and turned up in Europe somewhere. And so, it doesn't matter where our bikes are, you can see them on a GPS satellite. And so I went into ChatGPT and said, how do I monetize the GPS tracking of our vehicles? Because people want to know what people's movements are, and there's value in that. You've got to be very, very careful because you don't want to be sharing people's information. There is laws against that. We suggest to our customers in China, for example, we say, look, if you allow us to share your information, we will give you a reduction, or we will give you a percentage of what revenue we get out of sharing of your information. We did a deal there a couple of years ago with Volkswagen in China, where Volkswagen took a cohort of our 2,000 customers, tracked them for 6 months. The customers were happy with it. We paid the customers to do it. And then Volkswagen said, look, we want this data to work out whether these customers want to have electric cars, because they might go from two-wheeled to four-wheeled. Are they using it for 10 kilometres a day? Are they using it to drop the kids off at school, etc.? We had that one deal and it was very lucrative to us. We ended up getting more money out of the out of Volkswagen than we did for the actual subscription of the vehicle. But we shared that with the customers, right? So on a 50-50 basis. The customer was happy, Volkswagen was happy, and we were happy. It was only for a 3-year period for 200 vehicles, and it's now finished. But when I asked ChatGPT the other day to look at our current GPS, within seconds, it came back to me and said, basically, this is where you've asked the money question. They said, your value of your information is incredibly valuable, and this is how you would monetize it. And it said, we will then upload the information from your GPS trackers. We'll set an algorithm for that will then work out everything, every question that the car sellers, whether they be Hyundai, Volkswagen or whatever, they said even the UK government would love your information. And then we'll work out the likely path for you to turn that into money. And you sort of sit there, and this didn't happen in 5 minutes. This didn't happen in me getting a group of consultants and saying, can you tell me how to monetize my data? This happened in 30 seconds, where it printed out a list of what I should do. It estimated what the revenue from that would be. It estimated the best course of action to who to approach with it. And you just look at that and you think, that's £100,000 consultancy fee and a year's work. Honestly, if I didn't have ChatGPT and I went to somebody and said, I want to monetize my data, how much is it going to cost me and how long is it going to take? It's going to be somewhere between £25,000 and £75,000 and a year's work for 4 consultants. And I had that in 30 seconds. That's jaw-dropping type stuff for me, and so dangerous, so good, but also so dangerous, like you just shake your head at it.
Oh, completely. And I think the old world model of where you're relying on advisors for sort of, I wouldn't call it a basic question because that's obviously quite an advanced one, but when you're asking someone for those kind of tasks, well, that's going to die out for sure. But I think it's the implementation and execution of that.
Yeah.
You probably prefer to have a human in there or several humans to implement across your business worldwide.
Yeah.
So I think people need to upskill for sure.
Yeah.
But AI will be, or has been already, revolutionary. We haven't even I think even hit the tip of the iceberg yet. I think we're still looking at the visible stuff, and there's a whole host of things around, as you say, around healthcare, around pretty much around everything that we do.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
exciting.
every shop, you and I, we stopped into a shop on the way here today. Every shop can have facial recognition and stuff now. I mean, having lived in China when I was there, I've now been out of China 3 years or coming up to 3 years and living in the UK. But in China, when you're going across a large crosswalk, when you go through the airport, it does facial recognition. So when you're at a crosswalk in China and there's, 9 roads going this way, 9 roads going that way, and, everything's crazy in Shanghai, for example, if you go across the crosswalk too early, it'll make there's speakers that'll tell you that you're doing it, but there's big television screens and your face will pop up there and it'll guilt you.
Wow.
My face will pop up there if I've gone across the crosswalk too early, and it'll guilt you and say, and you'll be automatically, because we've got to register where your hotel, will send a fine to you for crossing the crosswalk. And you're constantly seeing these faces pop up on all 4 corners of a crosswalk. And when I was in China recently at a big factory, one of the biggest in the world that makes e-mopeds, normally you go in there and they're very impressed if you take your phone out because you're going to show it to all of your Western colleagues and show them how big your factory is. And I've been to this factory many times, called Yardi. They make 48 million scooters a year. I think they're the 3rd biggest manufacturer in the world. So, and they've got 5 or 6 different factories. I was there for half a morning and they made like 15,000 scooters while I was there that morning. But when I popped my phone out to say how marvelous it was, they said, could you put your phone away? And I said, there's no videos in here. And I said, okay, no worries. So I asked my Chinese colleague, what's the issue? And then they said, stop and watch. And so on the production line, there was, say, 50 people on the production line. And on a giant screen, they were watching each employee. And if the employee was working really hard and hadn't had a rest and had hit their criteria and was knocking it out of the park, they popped up on the big TV screen, and there was a picture of them, and they were awarded a star or a gold star or whatever. They got a tick. It had 3 levels, and they were given the tick level. At the same time, within 30 seconds, an employee who wasn't performing was zoomed up on the screen and belittled. So he was a 1 and the other one was a 5, And it dawned on me they had breaks every 15 minutes. So they had a break for 2 minutes every 15 minutes for these employees, which are going to be replaced by robots at some stage. But it was horrifying for me that, I love China, don't get me wrong, but the fact that these guys, and none of them were allowed to even take their eyes off and look at the foreigner walking along the production line. The Chinese managers of the factories didn't want us in there. We were like a virus in their factory organism that they didn't want in there, because that minute that I'm there, the guy might take his mind off a bolt or a nut that he's doing up, and that ends in a default manufacture. When you're making 48 million products a year, it's a lot, right? It's 1 million a week. So it goes back to my story about AI and all that sort of thing, that I'm just absolutely, flabbergasted by what's happening and the technology that's coming. And I'm so glad that I've created a business that there is still no miraculous way to get from A to B, but maybe there will be. Maybe somebody's going to come up with something that is going to enable people to do it quicker and faster than we're currently doing it. But it's pretty amazing what's going on out there at the moment, really.
Oh, completely. Patrick, we've got to get back onto you.
All right, no worries. Enough about me. Let's talk about me.
And what we're always interested here at Everyday Empires is how people became to be
right,
what they are today. Because we see a little snapshot of you today.
Yep.
With all your experience and all your activities, and hopefully in 5 years' time or a few years' time, we'll interview you again.
Yeah.
And we'll see if any of your answers change.
As long as I can get a Zimmer frame through your doorway.
You'll be fine. You'll be fine. So where did it all begin for you, Patrick?
I'm an Australian, born in Australia to Irish parents who immigrated to Australia in 1963, and I was born in 1964. Irish Catholic, so I've got 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and I'm the second youngest and the youngest male. I often say to my parents, they were heading for perfection. They got to me, then they had my younger sister, and they realised they were going backwards, and they just stopped. My little sister doesn't agree with that, but so I was an Australian born and bred, but I have dual citizenship in that I'm Australian and Irish. My father was in the RAF in the Second World War for the British Air Force, and was captured in the fall of Singapore, and was repatriated to Australia after the war ended because he was on the Burma Railway and was very ill, etc. And then he fell in love with Australia while he was there, went back to Ireland, met my mother, had my family, and then eventually got fed up with the Irish weather, to be perfectly honest, and said, look, I've been to Australia, let's go there. In the 60s, they had that £10 tourist sort of policy where Australia had a very small population. They were looking for immigrants, and my parents went there. They were looking at Canada or Perth in Australia. Thank God they picked Perth in Australia. Otherwise, we'd have duties on everything as we speak. But I, as a middle child, if you like, and the youngest child, I was very independent, and I didn't really need a lot of help from anybody. I was very strong-minded, and so my parents sort of gave me free range to a large extent. I was always interested in business and just interested in anything. I enjoyed sport, I enjoyed business, I enjoyed everything. I went through school okay, then went to university okay, and then I gravitated. I actually wanted to be an actor, to believe it or not, but my parents were very, uh, they just saw they wanted to give me an education that gave me the opportunity to make money. And like any parents, they said, "Look, don't be an actor; it's you're an idiot." Um, so I leaned towards business, and I enjoyed business. I My father had been a farmer in when he was in Ireland with a small farm. So I liked farming. I liked anything to do with farming and animals. And through working towards school and university, I taught myself how to shear wool. Wool is a big export of Australia to China, Italy, and everything. You've got merino wool, which is the most famous wool in the world. So as a young child, I started to get engrossed in that, and I used to travel with teams of people that were called shearing teams that would go to big farms and stations in Australia and do what's called a roustabout, which is nothing more than a slave labourer, that actually, as the wool is shorn, you put it into a wool classing guy who classes the wool. And then from that wool classing, you put it in a bag and it's sold at auction to markets around the world. It might come back as a suit from Italy or a jumper from China. So I did that for a number of years, and then I realised there was no future in just being a wool roustabout. So I became a wool classer, and a classer means that you can tell what sort of wool is worth. The wool on the bottom of a sheep is called a belly. It's much cheaper wool than the wool on the top of a sheep, and the wool around the face of a sheep is different to the wool on the back of a sheep. It all differs in value. So I understood that there was more money in becoming a classer. I was still only 15, 16, so I became a wool classer. And then after that, I started working part-time for the people that were selling the wool. And as I got older, about 18 years of age, the wool is normally auctioned. It's still to this day auctioned. It's a very traditional industry. So there'd be 30 or 40 customers from all around the world, and the auctioneer would sit down the front, and you would have all of the farmers sitting in a big gallery up behind, because the auction would determine what they were going to get for their wool. Wool is sold in microns, so micron is the thickness of wool. The skinnier the micron, the higher quality the suit. So the skinnier your micron of wool, the more value it is. And I would be sitting there and being responsible for selling the wool. And at the time, I was probably the youngest wool auctioneer in Australia. I worked for a company called Elders IXL, which is still one of the biggest in the world. And there's a picture of me in the wool auctioneering room back in Australia. If anybody is in Fremantle, Western Australia, they can go and check it. I'm actually there as the youngest wool auctioneer at the time.
Do you go back and check regularly just to check?
I do actually, and it's very, very. It's still there. It's like walking into a cinema, because it's like a ranked thing, like where you sit down the front and you're auctioneering the wool, and you've got to go fast, and you've got a lot of lots to get through. You might go all afternoon with a couple of breaks. You start off with your little gavel, and ladies and gentlemen, selling under the terms and conditions, passed a lot, one speak up, spit it out, what am I bidding? And then you go through all the bidding. You've got to remember all the names of the Japanese bidders, the Chinese bidders, and then eventually you just slam it down, and that wool lot is sold, and the farmers up there are relying on that for their livelihood. So a lot of pressure. So I learned a lot about pressure. And I was good at that. But I was really interested in business, and through one way or another, I did some part-time work for businesses and got involved in business in Perth. Australia is basically, particularly Perth, is a big mining community. Australia is basically a quarry with a beach around it. It doesn't have a lot of other things that it's doing. It's not adapting to making its population smart. When you can go out and dig up gold, iron ore, manganese, chromite, whatever, we're blessed to have everything. It's very easy to sit back on your laurels and just become a mining guru. And if you look at the wealthiest people in the world and the wealthiest people in Australia, they're all somehow involved in mining. Gina Rinehart is one of the top 10 wealthiest women in the world, and she's comes from Perth, my hometown, and she mines iron ore. So when I first left university, I worked for Arthur Andersen, which would be you would vaguely remember. Arthur Andersen were an American chartered accountancy firm. They needed somebody that normally they would have just traditional accountants, that you would just do normal accountancy, but they had a corporate recovery team that I was involved with. And basically it was going and looking at mining companies and stuff that were going bankrupt. And I was a very low level individual, but my job was to have a look at the value of the assets of the companies and etc. And in that, I sort of got a pretty good understanding of mining companies, and I actually got to meet a lot of mining company guys. And one day I was very unhappy at Arthur Andersen. You lived in these cubicles, you were just an insect doing work. They were all carpeted, you couldn't see with each other. You went there, you clocked in, you clocked out, you clocked to go to the toilet, you did all that sort of thing. It was a traditional route of the apprenticeship of becoming a businessman, and it taught me things like how to read a balance sheet, how to reconcile a bank statement. It's critical things that I still use today. But I was very, very unhappy. And there was happenstance that I was walking down the main street of Perth, which is St George's Terrace, and there was a guy called Trevor Tennant, who I hope he won't mind me mentioning his name, who was an ex-BHP senior executive. I'd met him through work experience previously, and he saw me in the street, and I got along quite well with him. He said, "Patrick, are you happy in your job?" And I'd literally walked out of Arthur Andersen, was pissed off. I would have become a street sweeper if they'd offered me the job. And I said, "Yeah, what have you got in mind?" And he said, "Well, look, we're starting a new business and a new mine, and we need somebody at junior level that will come in and, go with the guys that sell the commodities from our mine and basically take notes and clean up the loose ends, just a correspondence boy, if you like, but, you'll learn a lot about the shipping processes. You'll learn a lot about everything. I'd be interested." So I said, "Yep, let me go back and get my bag." So I was in, and from that business, it was called Falcon Australia. I then learnt a lot about mining, and as I grew older, I was only in my early 20s, I started to make reasonable cash. I was promoted internally. I was doing things that a 21, 22, 23-year-old shouldn't do. That was around 1986, 87. Then a little thing called the stock market crash came along in 1987, and October, I'll never forget it, because I remember ironing my shirt on the way to work. I had a MGB convertible. I had a hot girlfriend, had my whole life in front of me, and I'm watching the TV while I'm ironing my shirt to head into the office, and it said the Dow Jones had dropped, whatever it was at the time, 500 points. It's nothing in these days, but in those days it was a big deal. And I had a small portfolio of probably $100,000 at that time. And so I rushed into the office, shirt tail still unironed, and I learned a philosophy on that day called the dead cat bounce. So I rang my stockbroker and said, "What do I do? How do I get out of this?" And he said, "Don't. It's going to bounce back." And you as an accountant would know the expression dead cat bounce. A dead cat doesn't bounce very high, but while I was making the decision to get in or get out, the bounce had occurred. So when you throw a cat on the ground, it'll only bounce this high and then it'll drop off the edge of the planet. So I, in my miraculous 22-year-old state, thinking I'm a genius, said, "Look, I'll hang on to the shares." So my 100 grand was turned into, within 48 hours, was turned into, I owed them $10,000 because I had some positions that were open. So I went from owning $100,000 a hot blonde girlfriend and MGP to being 10 grand in debt and unemployed overnight. So that wasn't going to go down well, but there was nobody employing anybody in our industry. If you watched the movie Wall Street, that was, there was no Gordon Geckos in those days. They were all running for cover. And so I ended up just, making ends meet. And I worked for building companies. I remember I had a job scraping the cement off door arches to before the painters came in on housing estates in Perth. So I did anything to make ends meet. But Trevor and I had kept in contact, and Trevor said, look, it's not going to rain forever. For every catastrophe, there's another upside. So I ended up getting back into bed with Trevor and getting into a new company, and it went from there. So I had learnt the ups and downs of business. I'd learnt the ups and downs of everything. And all of a sudden I found myself a little bit older, a little bit wiser, 25, come through the stock market crash. And all of a sudden I was on planes, trains and automobiles to the rest of the world. I was pretty good at what I did. My job was a catastrophe coordinator. So when you're mining and exporting commodities, sorry if I'm going on here.
No,
just
please.
interject anytime you like.
I will.
When you're mining and exporting bulk commodities, they go on big ships. So they're going in quantities of 50, 60, 100,000 tonnes. And iron ore is the number one in Australia. The way it works is that you mine the stuff, you analyse it. It gets a set of certificates were analysed by an independent company, which is worldwide renowned. And then it says, look, your iron content is 63%, your this content is this. So you know exactly what's on that ship. It's a rounded average of what's on that ship. You get paid 90% through a letter of credit for what is shipped. So if, for argument's sake, the cargo is worth $1 million, you're going to get 900,000, and then the remaining 10% you get when the other side has analysed it. That protects them against maniacs sort of bribing the analysis people or somehow reconfiguring the shipments. In Australia, it doesn't happen, right? What you ship is what you get, but in the rest of the world, it does happen. If you're getting shipments from Africa, if you're getting shipments from South America, our competitors, Brazil is a big competitor in iron ore exports to Australia. Africa is as well. They will cheat. So consequently, the customers are always on guard for the 10%. And typically, the 10% will just be forgotten about because it's the arbitrage of doing the business. We say your analysis is this and you say it's that, and we just let it go. But when it's hundreds of millions of dollars, you can't afford to let 10% go. In some cases, it might be the margin. So my job was to be flown to the outturn. So the ship would arrive in Japan or Korea or Egypt or for that matter, China, I was spending a lot of time there. And I would go down to the port, which was normally a grubby, horrible place, check into a hotel, get an interpreter and go down and watch the shipment unloaded, guard the sample while it was being analysed, make sure that it was a fair analysis. And in most cases, it was the same as the intern analysis or only slightly different. And we got paid the 10%. Multi-billion-dollar companies like BHP were not going to give 10% to a Chinese customer. The worst cases were customers in the Middle East because they just felt that it was a free-for-all. They would just steal the cargo, it didn't matter what it was. So consequently, there was no big problems in China. I had lots of challenges, but I was getting older. I was 26, 27. I was paid extremely well. I would literally come home, get on a plane, fly out again, and be in you can imagine, as a 26, 27-year-old who'd never been overseas before, and I'm getting flown by somebody and built up in a hotel, and it's the adventure of a lifetime, So I was loving it. And, I thought it was the future for me, but I eventually, like any job, it sort of starts to grind on you. You know, you watch your friends having birthdays and parties and all that sort of thing. And I remember looking out the window of an aeroplane one day and thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. You know, I'm flying business class. I'm on this aeroplane. I get off. I've got a driver, a hotel. This is pretty cool. You know, I've got my weekends off. But eventually the gloss starts to dwindle as you've lost all of your friends. You don't have relationships. You struggle with a lot of things because you're traveling all the time. And I had a situation where I had to go to Egypt, which is not somewhere that I would normally go all the time, because Egypt was not a big importer from Australia, but there was a problem in Egypt with a customer. And I was, at that stage, I was sort of a gunman for hire. You know, I'd started not just working for the big mining companies, the smaller mining companies that needed help. They would come to me and say, look, Patrick, and this was one particular mining company that had shipped a shipment of manganese to Egypt. Manganese is used to make stainless steel. You have iron ore, you have chromite, which gives it the shiny stuff, and manganese gives it the malleability, and it's a mix of the three that makes stainless steel. But it, for all intents and purposes, it looks like a rock. It just looks like iron ore. So at this stage, I was about 28 years of age, I guess, and I'd done heaps of these trips. But I got into Cairo, and I'm in the hotel in Cairo, and I don't know if people are familiar with Egypt here, but you've got the Suez Canal and the Sinai Peninsula, which is down on the right-hand side in central Egypt. It's where the 7-Day War and all that sort of thing took place. And I was in Cairo and in my hotel, and I get a bang on the door, and it said, look, the Australian Consular General is downstairs, or their representative was downstairs. So I go downstairs, and the guy says to me, look, we know what you're here for, and you should just write this off. You know, these guys, where you're going is not civilized. In those days, there was a lot of kidnappings and stuff going on of Western businessmen. To me, that was like, give me a break, you know. I'm an Australian, you know, I'm indestructible, don't even think about it. And the Australian government said, look, we're letting you know if you go ahead with this trip. And this was a small mining company in Australia. This 10% meant a lot to. The guy's name was Simon Farrell, was the CEO. I still remember to this day. And I wasn't about to pick up the phone and say, Simon, sorry, thanks for flying me to Egypt. I'm now turning tail and heading home. So I said to the Australian government, they said, look, if you go, you go. It's called Abysinema on the Sinai Peninsula. You can Google it yourselves, have a look at it. It wouldn't have changed much from when I was there 30 years ago to now, because I Googled it the other day and you can see it. It's just a horrible bloody place. It's just a port in the middle of a desert. So they said, look, you can go, but we're not going to prevent you, but trust me, if something happens to you, you're not going to be on the breakfast shows in Australia saying Australian kidnapped or whatever. We've warned you, you're on your own. So I said, look, I'm going to go anyway. And they consolidated, they worked with me a little bit in that they said, look, there's a military convoy going that way and they're passing by Abysinema, and they've agreed, we've got agreement from the Egyptian military that you can go with them in that military convoy. And it was about 30 vehicles, all jeeps and trucks and all that sort of thing. So I got in with into this military jeep with this guy. It's sort of an open jeep, right? With this crazy Egyptian who's a young guy, and he had a radio hanging on the rear vision mirror, and he was playing you know, typical lovable Egyptian music. Sorry to any Egyptians out there, I'm sure it was nice. But so we head off, heading to Abysinema, and I'm still, in those days you couldn't take a, do you need to go to the loo or anything? In those days you couldn't Google Abysinema. You have to look it up in a map. There was no pictures of the places, no anything. And in my naive peanut-sized brain, I imagined that Abysinema was a nice, you know, what I'd seen from television, you know, some Arab camels in the background and some nice people and a bit of an oasis and, you know, close to the ocean. and there'd be a decent hotel, and there'd be an ATM, and there'd be a nice little Egyptian restaurant, and before long I'd be Lawrence of Arabia wandering around and owning the whole city. Didn't work out that way. You go when you cross over the Suez Canal. There's a lot of military stuff going on in those days, and when you go over into the Sinai, you really know you're in the ends of the earth. There's just nothing. It's just desert, and the convoy. At those stages, there was people blowing up convoys and kidnapping people and stuff, and the convoys working very, very aggressive. The trucks don't have more than this much distance between them. You're all going flat out, so you're all doing sort of 60 miles an hour. And there's people on machine guns and all that sort of thing, and everybody's head swiveling. And by this time, the penny's starting to drop to me, and I'm there with this bloke, one of the last vehicles in the convoy, bearing in mind they did not want me to get to Abyssinia. They had done everything they could to stop me getting there. And it was just pure tenacity that I kept on going. Anyway, long story short, about 3/4 of the way, and this is half a day's drive to Abyssinia, unbelievably, our Jeep got a blowout. So it's getting towards dusk, and there's a whole lot of, I don't understand a word of what's going on. There's a whole lot of gibberish going on, and people, and there's a big sand dunes. And I remember being very, very close to Mount Sinai. Being a Catholic, has its own meanings for me and everything. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking that the convoy is going to sit around. They're all going to repair the tyre and everything. And then before I know it, all the yelling and screaming has subsided. The convoy gets up and heads off, and I'm left with this guy with the Jeep. Now, I'm also thinking he's military. He's going to have this down pat. He's going to know what he's doing. It's like dealing with a 11-year-old. He couldn't find the spare, couldn't find the jack, couldn't find this, wouldn't move. I'm trying to get him to move the vehicle onto stable ground before he jacks it and everything. Not interested, just going at it and just telling me to get lost. He sort of half jacks the vehicle up, and then the jack topples over and he squashes his hand, his left hand. And so he's not broken his entire hand, but serious cuts and bleeding and stuff. So, and he's up and running around, and the car he's got the nuts off the car, but the wheel's not off fully. The car's fallen off the jack. The wheel's gone this way, and it's the jack, which was one of these jacks that goes up like an extension jack like this, has fallen over and crushed his hand. So he pulled his hand out, it's crushed. There's not a clean rag in the whole of the vehicle. He's in serious pain, this guy. Probably had broken fingers or whatever, I don't know. I found in my luggage a T-shirt, so I've wrapped a T-shirt. I've still got a picture of it somewhere, an old picture. In those days, there was no mobile phones. I'm thinking I've got to get a picture of this because people are not going to believe this. So there's this guy sort of sitting on the ground with my T-shirt wrapped around his hand and the Jeep on itself. So I've ended up repairing the wheel, and I've driven the Jeep the next, it was another 50 miles to Abyssinia, pulled in there, and then I had to stay in Abyssinia for 3 months before we actually got paid, and it was, I won't go into the details of it now, but it was horrific, that it's a one-horse town. They wouldn't let me go and see the cargo during the day. They would only let me see it at night. They would give me restricted rations. It was Ramadan. I was not expected to eat or drink during the hours of Ramadan. They had malaria carrying mosquitoes that, the size of a horse. I could have ridden one home. But I just stayed at it. That's one of the things about me. I just cannot stop things. They tried everything to get rid of me. Other people were heading back to Egypt all the time, and every day they'd come to me and say, do you want to be on this truck? And I'd say, no, we've got to analyse this. We've got to do this. I remember the guy, they treated me so appallingly, but in the end, they just had a grudging admiration for me. They thought, who is this guy? This guy's crazy. He's going to end up dead for this cargo. We better just pay them. So eventually they paid us. I headed out to Egypt, and I remember when I remember being in Abyssinia and looking at the sky, and you could see the jet stream of the aircraft. Egypt is a big centre at aircraft at 30,000 feet. And I remember looking up there and thinking, what am I doing? in Abyssinia. I should be on one of those planes getting out of here. Long story short again, I eventually got back to Cairo. I took Singapore Airlines out to Singapore and then back to Perth. And I remember thinking, I was so happy to get out of that alive. I realised I'd had a near-death experience caused by my naivety. And I joked to people that I kissed the floor of the Singapore Airlines plane. But when I look back now, I actually think I did. I think I actually got on my knees. I remember the blue carpet and kissing the carpet of the floor of the Singapore Airlines aeroplane. I was that happy to get out of Egypt. I've never been back since, and I don't recommend it as a place to visit if you want a nice holiday. But on that, it was a cataclysmic moment. We spoke about cataclysmic moments before this meeting today and it was like a penny drop that I thought, geez, I have just risked my life for this company, and this company did nothing for me. They paid my fee. Nobody came to the airport and said, well done. There was no hugs. My family didn't know my life was at risk. I looked at my email and there was another company that said, can you go to South Korea or something? And I thought, hang on, what am I doing here? These guys on this particular shipment, it was $1.3 million that was outstanding, and I got the $1.3 million in. I thought, what am I doing? I got a $6,000 fee for doing that, and I got my airfare and accommodation paid, but I'd risked my life. And so I decided to start my own company because I knew that there was commodities in Australia that were very in demand, and I knew where their location was because I was involved in the mining industry. And I knew that there was one particular location that hadn't been used by anybody. So within weeks of getting off that plane, I had found this resource. It's called chromite in Western Australia. I pegged the tenement, which is making the tenement yours. I paid all the fees on it, and I mined that. That happened. I got back to Australia in September. I forget the year, but I got back in late September, and I created my own mining company with consultants and shipped a shipment for the first time ever of chromite out of Australia, and got that shipment away on Christmas Eve, 24th of December, the same year, after 3.5, 4 months of hard work. And I got paid for that shipment in the middle of January. And in the middle of January, I made my first $1 million. I made $1 million on that shipment, before tax and all that sort of thing, but I made $1 million. And I got involved in the mining industry too. So I built that mine up, and it was a small resource, so it wasn't going to be something that I could really scale at any length. It only had a limited lifetime of its mining. So I ended up selling that to a bigger company called Consolidated Resources. And I made a reasonable amount of money. I remember going and looking at my bank account one day and going to the ATM, and the ATM spit out a thing and it said like I had $2.2 million in my bank account. That's a big realization when at that stage I was about 29 or 30 years of age, and you think, wow, how did that happen? But in all of the travels and everything, so that was sort of the end of my mining career. I could have gone on with mining. I could have found other opportunities. I looked at other opportunities. It just wasn't for me. Mining is a big capital game. I was very lucky that I picked the timing right. I picked the commodity right. I got it right. I made some money, and then I had to look at other ways of moving forward. I was still consulting. I was still making money. I still had a reasonably good life. And I ended up buying some other tenements that I sold on and actually made a lot more money. So I did none of the work. These are iron ore tenements that I also pegged, and I took people there, and I went into the desert and I took geologists there, and I had the money to be able to do that. And I sold those tenements to one of the huge mining companies. And that was a really good return on investment for me. It was around $5 or $6 million. I'm talking Australian dollars too, by the way. So I was in my early 30s. I had plenty of cash, but I was also spending plenty of cash willy-nilly. I was considered a bit of a guru at what I was doing, and I was, consultancy fees were coming really, really easy to me, but I really felt I had to do something that I was interested in, and I knew that mining had seen its best out of me. In the dealing of everything that was regarded with getting payment for bulk commodities into China, you sometimes had to go into the secondary and tertiary businesses that were using the alloys or the steels or the iron ores or whatever, and that would be the way that you got paid, because quite often the mill that had taken the ore didn't have the money. It was where they'd sold the ore to that once it had been milled into steel or alloys or whatever else that had the money. And in doing that, I met a Chinese scooter manufacturer, and I always had an interest in motorcycles and motorcycle transport. And just in conversation, I'm sitting at this factory trying to sort out a metal deal, and I said, "Do you guys think?" I was amazed at the quality of their product, and I sort of said to them, "Look, do you guys export at all?" And they said, "No, geez, China is only just making its own motorcycles. Of course, we don't export. We'd never meet the criteria of foreign export." So I very quickly developed a company called Vmoto, VMOTO. I had enough money to employ some people, so I employed some of the Honda executives and Yamaha executives in China, and I set up a company manufacturing petrol scooters and bring them to Australia. I got them complied. I made them high quality. I called it a Vmoto Milan. I made it look like something that was from Italy. I did a great marketing campaign. Within 12 months of starting that company, we were the number one business in Australia in scooters. We outsold Yamaha, Suzuki, Kawasaki, and Honda combined. And then I thought, well, this is great, but I want bigger things. And I started to look at, I couldn't compete against Honda and Yamaha and Suzuki and Kawasaki. I caught them off guard, and I knew that they would head their manufacturing towards China, and they had limitless checkbooks. I didn't. So I immediately thought, look, we have to manufacture vehicles, but we have to make them a bit different. And in China, again, I met a German company called Emax who was trying to manufacture electric scooters in China. And they didn't have the experience in China that I had. They didn't understand how the Chinese worked. And so I ended up buying Emax for $1 million. I used my own money to buy Emax, and I bought Emax, and I bought all their engineers and brought them to China, and I bought all their technology to China, and I converted a Chinese factory into manufacturing electric scooters. That was great, and it went really well, and I still called it Vmoto Emax. And we were the first people to manufacture and export out of China. But because I was using other factories, I couldn't control the quality of the product. And so the worst thing that can happen is that you export a product and the product is crap. So I needed to start my own factory, and that was going to take a lot more cash than I had. And unbelievably, a guy banged on my office door in Perth one day, and his name is Blair Sargent, and he said, "Look, I've got a surfing brand that is listed on the stock exchange. We're getting killed by the Chinese. We've got offices in the US. I control the company, so if I do a deal with you, my word is gold. As long as we can divest ourselves of the surfing stuff, we could bring your Vmoto in and we could do a capital raise and we could go from there." It was called Optima Corp, and the share price was 5 cents. 5 Australian cents. So it made perfectly good sense for me to do that. Blair was a very, very sharp guy as well. So I vended in Vmoto into Optima Corp, changed the name to Vmoto. We issued a lot more shares to pay for the Vmoto business. And all of a sudden, Vmoto was born. We had a market cap of, I don't know, 5 or 10 million by the time I left Vimoto, it had a market cap of 120 million. So I did that deal. I then did a capital raise. I went and raised money and built a factory in China. I went and lived in Nanjing in China, and brick by brick built this building, which is huge. It's the size of, 5 times the size of Lourdes. It was, I forget the meterage at the time, 30,000 metre factory, which is still in existence today and still working today. And as we sit here now, is still making scooters. That went really well, and I made money out of it. And I went and lived in China and I was overseeing it. But and I'm a big advocate of China and love China. But as a foreigner working in China, you're never going to be able to control exactly what's going on there. There's relationships between suppliers and all that sort of thing. And although Vimoto sales increased dramatically and we exported all around the world, I couldn't get the profit margins to where I wanted to. But I saw the car park go from bicycles to Porsches, and I knew there was something fundamentally wrong. But if you challenge your accountant or something in China and you're a foreigner, they'll just say, look, my mother's got a restaurant that's doing really well. But this is back in the day when China's booming, 25 years ago. And it was quite likely that the guys working for me had parents who had a restaurant that was booming. You couldn't contradict them. But there was nowhere I could find, and I'm the chairman of a listed company in Australia where the sales are going through the roof, but the profit margin is there, but it's still staying stagnant. And I'm the one that's going to go to jail if there's any fraud or anything caught within that company. Now, I'm not saying there was any fraud or anything. It was just a Chinese system. But I decided it was impossible for me to maintain control of that business. And I didn't want to go back to shareholders in Australia and say, look, I couldn't explain what was going on. So I ended up exiting that business and sold down my shares and took what cash I had to pay tax and everything on that. So I'd ended up with a few $1 million. And then from that, I decided, my area of expertise at that stage is still, I'd had Vimoto for over 10 years. I was 45 or something by the time I made the decision to do this. And I thought I've really got to use my expertise here in the industry, battery supply, steel supply, alloy supply. So and I thought, I mentioned earlier about when I was introducing Mute earlier, why I came about the concept of Mute. I didn't want ownership. I just had wanted usership. And so that's where Mute was born. And Mute is now 7 years old, 8 years old. And I'm using my contacts still in China. We've got a large operation in China. We've got an operation in Bali, small operation in Australia. We've got the UK here, which is still pretty small but growing. We've got a joint venture agreement in Greece, in Belgium, and a couple of other places. So the concept now is to use my contacts within the manufacturing industry to build electric mopeds and give them to people on subscription rather than ownership. And that's basically the story of where I am now. And now I've got to engage the next step of the business, where we've got a cash flow positivity this year. We've got some significant investors that are looking at coming on board. And now it's all about spur to growth here in the UK, build a business and then look at the opportunity to expand the business globally, and then look at an equity event, whether it be an IPO, a reverse IPO, a sale, or whatever in the next 2 or 3 or 4 years. So that's where we're at.
Patrick,
so I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't fall asleep during all of that.
No, not at all. I mean, it's one of those things where often I would interrupt and impolitely and delve into some questions, but it's a riveting story, and genuinely, because a couple of things I was thinking about as you were telling me. One is, or maybe a question: what was driving you that whole time? And I'll preface it with this: that you had some early success in your sort of 20s, quite clearly. Had some hairy moments for sure. Then you made the decision to be in more control of your own life and become an entrepreneur and delve into the mining world. Clearly very successful. Moved on from that, and then into the electric scooter business. China, Australia, flying all around the world. I mean, why were you doing what you were doing?
I think I wanted to leave a mark, and I always wanted to work for myself. I felt uncomfortable working with other people. When Vermoto was listed and I sold my shares, Vermoto said, there's a great article, if you Google my name and Google Vermoto, it says CEO and founder comes back, this is in, 2004 or something, as Vermoto sales plummet. So I went back there and they called me president of strategic business development.
Fancy.
Which was a lot of nonsense, but it was 10 grand a month, and all I had to do is rock up and meet a few suppliers and drink wine and fly around here and go to a few pitch events, etc. So I gave all that up to start Mute. I could have just sat there. If I'd sat in Vermoto to this day, I would still be sitting on, my shares would be worth $5 to $10 million, and I'd be sitting there and still getting paid that, I'm sure. But I decided there had to be a better system. I tried to convince the Vermoto directors to do that. I said, we shouldn't be selling to anybody. Let's just, and I still advocate that. The reason I did it is I had nothing else. You're as you get older, your entrepreneurial spread shrinks to where your area of expertise is. Your financial system, you can't go out and start a mine again, or you probably could, but you don't have the energy to. And I felt I really had that epiphany moment in Mute where I thought, I can get everybody on electric two-wheel transport around the world. It doesn't matter if you're a family, if you're a mum, you're a dad, you're a student, you have a Mute in your garage. It's just like a vacuum cleaner. It's just like anything. You just have it. It's on subscription. The wife uses it to go to university. The husband uses it to go to the train station. The kids use it to go to school. It's just there. And I still advocate that. I still think it's a great green solution for urban transport, but I have to make it easy for people to get on it. I have to get them beyond fear of damaging themselves. I have to get them on beyond fear of range anxiety and all those things that electric vehicles, two-wheel vehicles tend to give people fear. We're a little bit ahead of our time. To be perfectly honest, when GM made an electric car years ago, they didn't sell it to anybody. They made a few hundred. There's a great documentary on it called The Death of the Electric Car, where GM realised that the electric car was going to destroy their petrol business model, so they recalled the 300 cars they had in America and crushed them. If you want to see a great documentary, see it. It's called The Death of the Electric Car. I know that Mute is the future of two-wheeled urban transport. Mute stands for Multiple Urban Transport Evolution because it's evolving into something. But we're years ahead of our time. Elon Musk should have never sold a Tesla to anybody. Elon Musk should have just subscribed his Teslas to people. Having a recurring revenue rather than a once-off saleable revenue for an electric vehicle is a much better model, because batteries are not engines that can be recycled. They've got limited recyclability, and you've got to be really, really careful with what you do with them. So it's much easier to say to people, particularly in our business where our batteries are removable, why not just continue to subscribe to the model without any commitment? Just use it. And if you don't like it, hand it back. Think about it. A person walks into a shop and says, I want to buy an electric vehicle. They have to pay the £3,000 for it. They have to get a credit card or a loan. The bank is going to be watching them. They have to prove that they live in a particular jurisdiction. They then have to insure it. If they're a young person, it's horribly expensive. They have to buy a helmet, buy a lock. They have to maintain it. They've got to depreciate it on their books. And at the end of the day, in 2 or 3 years, it's probably worth nothing. It'll end up out on their verge to be picked up with the rubbish. Or the exact same vehicle, you walk into Mute, 10 minutes later you ride out, you're fully insured, you've got a helmet, you've got a lock, you've got a bike, you've got no commitment. We're the absolute antithesis of, if you've got a fear for commitment, Mute is the business for you, right? You can hand it back if you don't like it. And we also now partner you with people that, if you use our Mutes and use our partners, say Tesco, Boots or whatever, your Mute will be free. In China, where we have over 150 partners, if you use your Mute on a monthly basis it's free. You pay nothing for it because the discounts that you're getting from the partners we have will far outweigh your subscription fee. So in answer, it's a long way of getting around to your question of why did I do it. One, I really want to see change. Two, it's how I earn my living, and I'm too old and too crusty to now change. And that's it. They're the two main reasons.
So I want to pull it back a little bit, if you don't mind, because I think that's a wonderful articulation of mute and its justification, and we both know it will be a significant business. I often say I think it'll be $1 billion business in the next 5 years. I'm sure you have a bigger number in mind, but
I'd be happy with $1 billion, but but I do believe there is very few businesses that you can see so much scalability, and this business is really one. And people say to me, "Aren't you worried about competition?" This business has so much scalability that competition comes. Who cares? There is room for 4 or 5 mutes, but we're the only ones at the moment.
Well, and the barriers to entry are pretty high because all the painful points of it's not just your tech; it's also like the insurance elements, for example. The battles that you've had with insurers have been unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. If someone has to have the same battle, they'll have to leverage off your work, which is
they
impossible.
just people just give up. That is one of the challenges, and the supply chain. The guys that I grew up with in the industry are now the heads of these giant factories. I was in a giant, that Yardea factory that does 48 million the other day. I'm a tiny, insignificant customer, but they had a huge billboard out the front saying, "Welcome, Patrick Davin, to the factory." I'm not big noting myself, but if you go into Wikipedia and search me, it'll say, I'm the first person to actually manufacture an Australian brand of motorcycles and export them overseas. The industry knows me. They know that I'm tenacious and I know what I'm doing. I know the front end of a scooter to the back end. When you know the manufacturing business so well, it makes it easy to sell the product. But I do believe, and I have a great team around me, like we were talking about Key Man and everything, the Mute is built by a team, and the guys that are in Mute, I won't mention all their names, but they know who they are. They're the key to the business. They're smarter than me. They're younger than me. They're driven. They need me as a figurehead at the top, the chairman of the board, but the next generation of people, as much as I was bitching about getting the next generation of young people to come and work for us and what their expectations are, in that we do have a young group of very, very smart, very, very driven people, and I'm very appreciative of that. So it's not all bad. So I'm with you. I mean, this is going to be one of those companies, I think I've told you this story, I watch Airbnb, if you look at the travel of Airbnb, they have one of the greatest pitch decks ever. It was 3 pages, right? But their history was they couldn't raise any money and they just kept on going, and it was 5, 6, 7 years. And then, they went from nothing, they were about to give up, and then they got Frank Soros, who invested, I think, 700 or 800 grand in them, and that just led them to explode. And Mute, Airbnb doesn't have an asset. They don't own a house, and we own a lot of assets because we're asset heavy because we have vehicles. But if you're recycling those vehicles, you manage those vehicles, you're GPS tracking those vehicles, we recycle the plastic, we recycle the steel, we recycle the alloys, we recycle the batteries. So technically, you've got an asset, but it's in the ether of the business environment that you can turn that asset over and over and over and over. We made in China a couple of years ago, we used the old plastics to make our own series of helmets. Because I'm a steel and alloy guy, I know exactly how to dispose of the batteries and the steels and the alloys and what they're worth and how it'll all get recycled. All we need to do is just have a couple of key markets that are Western markets where it's successful and people accept it, and then it's off to the races. In the UK, we've got ULEZ. We've got the mayor talking about charging £2 per kilometre for vehicles travelling, or per mile for cars travelling in the city. in 2030, you've got the banning of petrol sales of two-wheeled scooters and motorcycles in the UK. That means from 2028, people will have no choice but to start. You don't want to buy a new scooter if it's going to be banned in 2 years. So that's going to affect us much quicker than anybody else thinks. It's already happening in Holland. It's already happening in Belgium. You won't be able to get around in vehicles that are gas guzzling vehicles. It's just you're just going to be priced out of that. And how are those people going to travel? You know, a mute subscription in London ranges from 160 to 250 pounds. What do they call it? The cards that you use, you know, for rail travel here is 250 to 350 pounds a month. You know, we're less than a travel card. So I'm very excited about the potential. Now it's just driving that home to both our customers and investors. You know, we still need money to grow the business, and it's a case of convincing the investment community that we're a good bet.
I think listening to your journey, you and touching back on that, you went from the corporate world. I mean, the highest level. I mean, Arthur Anderson. Whilst we joke about it now, instead of the big four in the accountancy world, we had the big five. Of which Arthur Anderson was very much involved in that. So you've operated at that kind of level. But it sounded like when you shifted to the entrepreneurial world, you were pissed off. Well, you were pissed off, but you were also wanting more control over your life. Do you think that's a theme with a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners?
I think it is. You know, I remember. I'll give you an Arthur Anderson story. When Arthur Anderson was an American company, and I was in Perth, there was 300 employees in Arthur Anderson in Perth. And you had to wear a certain tie and a certain jacket and a suit. And I was working on the 5th floor of the building, and I went down one day. Perth gets very hot. It was 42 degrees one day. And I was going across the street in Perth to get a sandwich and a Coke and come back to the office to work. And in doing that, I left my jacket off. And I got down, went across the street, came back up, and somebody said the managing partner wants to see you. So I go in there, and my direct boss, who was a female, and the managing partner were there. And they said, "Patrick, how are you?" And I said, "Good." And they said, "You were seen today crossing over the main street of Perth without your jacket on. Would you like to explain yourself?" And I said, "It's 42 degrees outside." And they said, "Yes, but did you or did you not sign this mandate with Arthur Anderson United States saying that you would wear appropriate attire because you could run into one of our clients when you're out there?" And I said to them, "This is my attitude. This is why I'm an entrepreneur." So I said to both the managing partner and my boss, I said, if I was a client of Arthur Anderson, I would like the people advising us to be smart enough to not be wearing a jacket on a day like today. Because I said, if you're going to walk across the street with a jacket on just to look good, I would prefer that they get good advice from us. And my advice to them would be, don't wear a jacket. And by the way, take the tie off. And they looked at me like, I got a written warning from Arthur Anderson from that day for taking my jacket off. That was the day that I went, this is not for me. As I snuck back to my cubicle with my can of Coke and sandwich. You know those cubicles, you've seen them. They've got carpet on them, and you're sitting there, and you. In Arthur Anderson, they used to charge in 3.5 minute intervals. So,
sorry, did you say 3.5 minutes?
Yeah, 3.5 minute.
Oh my god! I thought my wife, she's a lawyer. She was charging 6 minute intervals.
No, 3.5 in Arthur Anderson, and so because they worked out that you could go to a coffee, you could get a coffee in 3.5 minutes, or a toilet break was 3.5 minutes, depending if you had a number one or a number two.
Well, yeah, that's insane.
Yeah. Well, it might have been 4 minutes. I don't know, but it was ridiculous. But that was the story of if anybody in Australia sees this podcast, the people will know who you can't make that shit up. It's like, and so I just scratched my head and said, look, I've got to get out of here. Once you're an entrepreneur, you can't take orders from other people very well. So you're basically ruined. How am I now, for example, going to sit down and take orders from anybody? I couldn't do it. I'll take advice from somebody. I'll take advice from you if it's tax advice or financial advice, whatever, but I will never take orders from anybody. And I'll try and use the advice as best I can and I'll listen to my team members and I'll listen to shareholders and I'll try and do the best I can. But at the end of the day, I'm still free to make my own decisions. That comes with the responsibility that we talked about earlier of every night you go to sleep, you pray that your decisions are right because there's a lot of people relying on you. And you got to make sure that, and I think even with you, I think I've rung you a number of times, said, Rohit, what's your opinion on this, particularly on the corporate cut and thrust of what's happening in investment here? I do the same with Matt King. He's previously had a podcast with you. He's a great advisor to me.
Shout out to Matt King, by the way.
Yeah, Matt
Wonderful
King,
man.
legend. Yeah. Married too young, but other than that, fantastic. So, you know, the simple answer for me and where I am is there is nowhere else for me to go. You know, I've now dug my trench for myself. I do believe in what I'm doing. I'm really excited about it. You know, there are days when I look at the numbers or I have a great meeting, an investment meeting and stuff, and I go home and I can't take the smile off my face. But there are also days where I've been just slammed by 3 investment funds who just say, this will never work and you're an idiot and you're going to get beaten by giant competition and all that sort of thing. And you go home and they're the nights that are hard to sleep with. But so far, I'm happy, and you know, I have days like this where I'm talking to another individual like you, and that makes me happy also. You know, if I can share any advice, good, bad, or indifferent with people, it's fantastic.
And just when you get those rejections and you get that sort of, you know, from pretty senior people, from funds that, you know, on paper were very successful, from people who have made some amazing decisions, and they're telling you, Patrick, your business is nonsense, or, you know, whatever their feedback is. How do you punch through that and go, I'm going to prove you wrong?
It's very difficult. You know, we have some high interest rate loans here in the UK because we've been developing the business and we've had to take high interest rate loans to do that because we haven't had large investment. And I sat with some key investors that are very successful the other day, and I told them that we had these high interest rate loans, which I told them they were what the interest rate was, and in this particular case, they were 20%. And the head of this company just said, "That's it," and just slammed his hand on the desk, slapped his computer, and said, "I'm not wasting one more moment with this nonce, this idiot. If he's got a business with 20% interest rates." Very simple for him to say that and yell at us when he's not had to experience that himself. And how do I handle it? Handle it very, very poorly. You know, you've been kicked right in the ghoulies by somebody who is very, very successful and controls the keys to your investment. And they just out and out tell you you're an idiot. And you go away from that and you've got to compartmentalize it and then break it down and say, look, how do I bounce back from this? I think if you really have a bad business, it's very hard to do that. But that's when I sit down and, you know, get a spreadsheet out and look at our costs and look at our revenue and look at our growth. And I back myself into it again. I go, look, this is okay. We're heading in the right direction. And then I feel comfortable to go back and do it again. If you are thin-skinned, don't become an entrepreneur because you're just going to get kicked to death. If you are really sensitive, don't become an entrepreneur because you're just going to get kicked to death. You have to have resilience. I believe in God, so I'm not sort of one religion or another. I think God has a plan for us all. And I think the more you get kicked, the more you got a proportion of you has to say it's in God's hands. And God has never let me down. Some days I've gone, please, you know, why is this happening? But God tends to strip you down before he builds you back up because he wants you to be the best you are. When you have that attitude, it makes it manageable. I don't know what it would be like without God, to be honest, because I think, you know, how would you justify being stripped down all the time? I asked you earlier, do you sleep at night? I sleep okay at night. I don't sleep a lot. I'm a very late bed person and a very early riser, so I sleep 5 or 6 hours a night on average. But I don't worry because the last thing I do at night is I say, look, it's in your hands. And that's what I would advocate to anybody that's in business. God doesn't make you a genius. He doesn't solve your problems. He gives you the opportunities to solve your problems, and he tells you to get off your ass and get things done. And you have to do that, whether it be a difficult telephone call or a difficult meeting or getting told by a senior executive that your business is shit. Everything has a reason for it. You just got to keep on going. That's the philosophy I use.
And to those that are struggling today with a bit of anxiety, which I think is becoming more and more pronounced for multiple reasons, with practical matters of cost of living, moving forward, and with just general challenges across the board on a macro level. Last year we saw a lot of uncertainty politically, economically. It's still moving all over the place. How does someone sort of take a step back and gain perspective and go, right, this is my action plan? Because the emotional element and challenge makes it really difficult.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I don't really know what the answer is. I think at the end of the day, if you're riding on a business that really has no future, you have to be honest with yourself. And it doesn't, you see on the internet and social media, a lot of people saying, it's not about what winning, it's about what you lose during the loss. I'm not a big advocate of that. I'm not good at losing. And I think you can take lessons from losing, but I don't think you want to get known as a loser. I think what you've got to do is you've got to be really, really hard with yourself, and you've got to say, is my business model working? Is it worth participating in going forward with it? And if it isn't, and you can really see that, you've got to be honest with yourself. No use flogging a dead horse. In honest to God, I truly believe in Mute, and the numbers are heading in the right way. If they weren't, I would turn around to everybody and say, look, I miscalled the market. We were too late. The equity didn't come. I'm sorry, but we're not there. We're still moving forward. We had our biggest month ever in the UK last month, and we had one of the worst winter storms you've ever had. That means that there's a market out there. But I think people have got to be honest with themselves, and but if you do feel that you want to persevere and you want help, you've got to have friends around you that can give you honest advice that you can talk to. I mean, I will use an example of both yourself as a friend and advisor to me, and also Matt King. You've got to have people that'll call it as you call it, but you also need people that will give you that lift up, that are smart enough to give you a lift up. They might not 100% agree with what you're saying or whatever, but they'll say, look, the net of it all is they'll lift you up. You can rely on your family, you can rely on your friends, you can rely on God, you can rely on a lot of things, but you've got to really analyze what you want on a daily basis and try and make incremental improvements. Sometimes it can be so small, you sit there and you think, oh my God, I've got so much. I've got debt that I've got to pay. I've got shareholders that won't listen to me. I've got salaries I've got to pay. I've got HMRC on my back and all that sort of thing. But if you make a list, I'm a huge advocate of making a list, with putting the most difficult things on your list every day and knocking those out, so that the next day you feel that telephone call wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. We worry ourselves to death about the outcome of things, when 9 times out of 10 it's not as bad as we think. I've experienced great success in the UK. People talk about the UK economy sucking and all that sort of thing. The world's economies are struggling at the moment. But I've found that picking up the telephone and talking to the various government departments here, without exception, sometimes they're angry with you and stuff, but I've managed to negotiate payment terms, and we've had tight cash flows on HMRC debt, tax debt, this debt, rates, whatever. Even, we get a lot of PCNs for our vehicles and all that sort of thing. We've got to negotiate with the councils from that. If you're honest with them and you're talking with them, they'll work with you. And there is help for businesses here. We haven't had to get to the level where we've gone to get help, but there's always help for businesses. There's no benefit for a government to see businesses fail. 9 times out of 10, they want businesses to work. So I think it's just back your own judgment. At the end of the day, You can have friends, you can have family, you can have support, but it comes down to you. There's a great movie that everybody should see called The Founder, which is the guy that took over McDonald's, the McDonald's franchise. Michael Keaton is the main actor in it.
It's a great movie.
And, you know, that movie is all about persistence. That's about a 55-year-old milkshake maker who ends up taking over, a milkshake seller who ends up taking over McDonald's. Do that. Take yourself to a movie. Read a good book. There's a great book out at the moment about Netflix saying, and it's called That Will Never Work. That book, I read it on an airplane the other day. That is how any small business, it's like looking in a mirror. The doors that are slammed in you, the challenges you have. When you do get success, how you spend the money. When you do get success, how the shareholders all fight amongst each other. All those sort of things that you don't expect. I would advise anybody to go and read that book, see that movie, lift yourself up and just keep on going.
Yeah, I think that's a very aptly named book. That Will Never Work, because I hear it all the time, and sometimes I've said it. And as an advisor, I've always got to be conscious that whilst I have to provide advice, I can't disregard the human in front of me.
Yeah.
And if I see someone that's tenacious, persistent, and stubborn, sometimes it's worth going, do you know what, I'm gonna push aside my business expertise and go, do you know what, I back you as a person. And do you know what, why don't you go ahead and try it and see what happens?
Yeah.
But here's a couple of processes you should go through just to test your business plan. And so, it's particularly when it comes to the investment world, you see a lot of people that are very successful who've made great calls, and they will, as you've experienced, and sometimes I've been in those meetings with you, they'll say, this is nonsense, this is shit, this, you'll get eaten up by a bigger guy, or, this won't work, or it's a trend for now, but not for later. All the stuff you hear.
Yeah.
But then the best way to beat that kind of advice is to go, well, I'm still here.
Yes.
It's February 2025, and I'm still here.
Yeah.
So sometimes, whilst opinions can be valid, whilst they can be weighty, whilst they can be to a very large extent impacting, they can be wrong. And they are a snapshot of what someone believes at that time with the facts they presented to them. And even if the most senior people at the most senior institutions say you're chatting crap, sometimes you have to go, do you know what, I respect your opinion, but I'm going to prove you wrong.
Look, I think that is very apt. I think, and I'll give you a compliment here, I think...
oh, please don't.
Yeah, well, I will. I mean, you as a businessman and as an advisor to us, you have empathy, which is amazing, and there's not enough of it out there in business, because you can feel for the businesses. But I've also found with you that you're not afraid to say the hard words. So you're a combination of empathy. But if I ring you up and I showed you my cash flows and they were going backwards, you'd be kind enough to say, Patrick, I mean, I think you're atypically British in that way, that you won't say your company's stuffed. You'll say, I think you should change your direction and maybe close down the company. That's where your Britishness and your empathy comes from. But I think you've just got you've got to believe in what you're doing. From an investment standpoint, the way I rationalise how aggressive and how horrible the VCs and everything can be, they're getting thousands of these pitch decks across their desk every day. They don't even have time to read them. I look at a 20-page pitch deck and I laugh. They want to see a Tinkerbell 20-second pitch deck and they go, yes, I'll have another meeting with you and then I'll go for it. And I'll get my analyst to look at your pitch deck and I'll probably run the whole thing through an AI bot that'll then say, there's where the problems are. I think the jobs for analysts are probably going to be very difficult to get soon. So you just got to back yourself and you got to continue to work hard and you just got to continue to pray, I guess. I mean, in our instance, it's the small achievements that you get. We signed up somebody in a restaurant the other day because the restaurant delivery chains are now charging the restaurants so much, the Uber Eats, the Domino's, the Deliveroos, that the restaurants are not making any money out of delivery. So we are now supplying vehicles to the restaurants and saying, hang on, you've got a guy in the back washing dishes, right? And they go, yes. And they say, well, you've got an electric scooter from us. How about not paying Deliveroo 30% and just letting him run out and do deliveries in between washing dishes? Because we can tell you from GPS tracking that all of your customers are in 3 miles of your shop. Why are you paying Deliveroo 30% of your revenue to deliver your food? And they're starting to go, you're right. That makes perfectly good sense. And what we do is we give them a trial scooter and say, don't give it back, just use it and then tell us if you like it. And haven't had one handed back yet. They go, wow, this is cool. Like their petrol bill is zero. And all of a sudden their riders love it because it's nice and clean and there's no emissions from it. And all of a sudden you've got a customer. So the gig economy, which is out there at the moment, which is offering instant gratification to people and offering delivery online and all that sort of thing, there's a huge cost to that. Joe Blogg's Burger Bar is giving 30% of his revenue to Deliveroo and Uber Eats. 30%. Who can do that when they can have a mute scooter, have no emissions in their food, and the little guy out the back is riding the bike around for them, or even have a dedicated delivery rider? One restaurant we spoke to has 12 scooters that are from Uber Eats and Deliveroo that are delivering from them every day. It's crazy. It's huge numbers, right? So sorry to harp back onto mute again when we're talking more philosophically about business, but that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to find ways to make people's lives better, to make their businesses more profitable, to put less emissions in the air, to, we did some tests in Spain a couple of years ago where we had a box of an electric scooter delivering 10 pizzas, and we analysed the pizzas that were in the delivery scooter that was petrol, and we analysed an electric scooter. And what happened in the petrol scooter is as they delivered each pizza, the scooter is normally still running, idling. They open the box, take the pizza out, and all the fumes from the petrol, because the box is right near the exhaust, goes into the pizza.
Yeah.
So by the time it got to 7, 8, and 9, the pizzas were not edible by World Health standards. They were poisoning the customers. I had a meeting with Deliveroo. I said, do you realise? They said, we're not poisoning the customers. And I said, you are. And I said, the scary thing is now that you know it, you couldn't be sued as a director when you didn't know it, but when you've got the evidence, you do know it. Now, it still hasn't happened yet, but at some stage, somebody's going to wake up and go, you can't have a pizza delivery box next to an exhaust emitting stuff into the pizzas. It's going to kill people. It's going to cause cancer. They're the sort of the things that we're pushing to people. Do you want poison with that? That's our next advertising campaign. Fries, Coke, and poison. So there is huge opportunity for our business, and these are the things that keep me happy. It's like I don't fancy dealing with HMRC on a daily basis, or whatever. And this morning I had to deal with on council rates before I came here. But, I'll go home and I'll think of somebody who's just got off a plane or a train or a ship or whatever here and has got no job, no capacity to buy a vehicle, but he has a driver's license. Our riders can use the international driver's license, and he can walk into a mute and walk out 15 minutes later, and he's got a mute, he's got transport, and he's got a job because we put them in touch with the companies that want delivery riders. Do that every day and see how bad you feel. Doesn't matter if you're getting yelled at by some guy who's the head of a hedge fund. That's his job.
Fair enough. Patrick, we have a tradition on this podcast where
Yes.
we ask you a final question,
No worries.
which you've had the opportunity to.
I did not have sex. That was President Clinton.
No, nothing of that nature. It's a bit more mild for now. So the question is, if your 18-year-old self could have a discussion with your 80-year-old self, what would that discussion be about?
Don't go to Abyssinia. No, I don't know. I think it would be worry less and leave it in God's hands. Honestly, I mean, I I was brought up an Irish Catholic. I was hammered in to church, and I hated it. I went to Catholic schools, etc. It took me years to realize why my parents were channeling me that way. And I'm not a Catholic per se, but I just feel the minute you realize that there's something out there that's greater than yourself, that's when it becomes easier. That's when your blood pressure comes down, your life comes down. It doesn't mean you can be an idiot, but my advice to that 18-year-old is don't worry as much and leave it in God's hands.
What do you think the 18-year-old will say to the 80?
He'd probably say you're an absolute fuddy-duddy, because he's looking at himself through, I would have looked at myself as an 18-year-old, and he would have said, well, but religion has done nothing for me. God has done nothing for me. Everything you're talking about is rubbish. And he would probably say, I'm a raving lunatic. And he'd say, look, I can go on Instagram and become the next Joe Rogan. I can, make $1 million easily, and everything you're saying is wrong. So I don't know. I would hope that there is some sort of, I don't have any kids, so I don't have an 18-year-old that I can think of that would talk to me. I've got nephews and nieces, and I talk to them, and they're all very level-headed, actually. But I think they probably wouldn't believe me, and they'd probably say they're going to worry anyway, and they're going to go through all of that worry. Worry does you no good. You've got yesterday's history. I know it's an old adage. Today is today, and tomorrow is a mystery. And worrying about it is not going to change the situation. I think I'm a worrier by design. So coming from a worrier saying that, it's saying something. But I have felt recently that, if you do the right steps and leave it in God's hands, it sort of has a habit of working itself out.
Assuming part of the conversation, the 80-year-old will tell the 18-year-old this is what you've achieved or will achieve over the next, several decades. Do you think the 18-year-old will be proud?
I think so. I think I don't do what I do to be proud. And I saw something the other day that you have two deaths in life. You have your physical death when you die, and then your next death is when the last person on earth uses your name that's still alive. So you're forgotten, right? And that happens to billions of people. There's billions of us that have gone beforehand that are never spoken about again. I would like to think that when I die, I've left something behind that might last at least a few generations. And that may be I was a creator of Mute that allowed people to get from A to B environmentally, cheaply, and happily. Do I worry about that I leave something behind? I'm not married. I don't have any kids. Absolutely not. But I think you want to look after your family, live life fairly happily, look after your health, because I think health is, you wouldn't believe it looking at my gut, but that's food, not alcohol. But you want to look back and say that you've led a reasonably happy life. I think if you watch on the internet and anything, everybody of older age that has asked this question, they say the same thing as me, don't worry so much, it might not happen. And even if it does happen, what's the worst? If you lose all your money, you lose everything. There's not a person on the planet now that wouldn't be happy with their life stance physically. They would swap every cent they've got in 20 years' time to be physically fit. A perfect case is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs at 56, that were arguably the richest and most successful man on the planet, dies of pancreatic cancer because he self-diagnosed and then refused medical help. To this day, if he'd got help, he'd still be alive. And I'm sure that with those minutes to go, when they're saying, Mr. Jobs, you're about to go, and he was worth $18 billion, would you swap your $18 billion for another week? He would have turned around and said, abso-fucking-lutely. And I think that's what you've got to say. You've got to live your life, try and enjoy it as much as you can. Don't get caught up in monetary things. Don't believe all this stuff on the internet. Trust me, I've been there. I've been to a Porsche dealership 3 times and forked out for 3 brand new Porsches. I know what I'm talking about. I still scratch my head and say, why? You don't need physical things around you. You need great relationships, great partners, and a self-worth in yourself, and you need to be physically healthy. Look after yourself health-wise.
Wise words, Patrick. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for listening.
Appreciated. And I really appreciate your time and your wise words. And I think, if you don't mind me saying, being sort of 60, 61 years old, probably the
twilight, you can say it.
I want to say twilight. That's a bit harsh.
Twilight.
Got several decades in it. But probably towards the older end of some of our guests. And I think it's really interesting to compare some of your answers and your life experience to all the other guests that we've interviewed.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your wisdom, and I wish Mute all the success.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you and your team for giving us this opportunity and giving me an idea of why you're doing this. I really like the philosophy behind it. I wish you success in the future. This is episode 5, is it?
It might be 6.
6. There'll probably be a big drop-off after me, but I'm sure you can regain. That's when you need to go and find God. Anyway, thank you very much.
Much appreciated, Patrick. Thank you very much.
Cheers.